Hello, this is a guy who likes fanfiction and is too lazy to read, so here is an everlasting flame in audio form. Check the description for the links to the author. Chapter 13, Chromatic Star Blood of the Lion. So we'll send a detachment of soldiers over this way and have them loop around dash. Why not just have them cut a straight path through? We have the numbers, Claude dash. No, I agree with Claude, Edelgard, it's best to cut them off where we can dash. The flap to the tent for the war council opened, and all three lords paused in their bickering. Cyril stood at the entrance, his eyebrows creased together. We've got a problem. Flame ran into some trouble. There's always more and more problems. Can't they just be silent for a while? Dimitri stood up to full, both annoyance and worry building into him equally. Flame. Wasn't she watching Byleth? Cyril shrugged. Dunno, but she's real freaked out right now. Said she wanted to talk to Dimitri. She's in her tent right now, I think. Claude piped up. What about the mercenary? Is she still where we left her? Cyril blinked. Dunno. You'll have to ask dash. Hubert slithered into the tent. My lady, the mercenary has escaped confinement. Cyril craned his neck up. Hey, Hubert. Hubert glared down at Cyril, not responding. Edelgard let out a groan. Claude, did you not assure me that her restraints were tight? And I know I saw you giving her a sedative. They were, I promise. Hey, you yourself said that we just can't do anything about that warping of hers without a literal box of agarthium, which we kind of don't have on hand right now. And yet, I may have given her a sedative, but apparently I should have just given her head trauma, because somehow, she got up a few hours after being pumped with enough of it to put down 3 fully grown men for a day. This isn't that time for that. Shay being gone and Flame being distraught could only mean that Byleth is in danger. We must move quickly. Dimitri, ugh, fine. Hubert, go find Monica and bring her to Flame's tent. Edelgard snapped. Dimitri practically ran out of the tent, Claude almost tripping over himself in his haste to follow, and Edelgard being far more refined in her speed. He reached the infirmary quickly with Claude and Edelgard right on his heels, seeing Flame sitting on the edge of a bed, her eyes red and blotchy. She was hugging herself with her arms, and an expression of such guilt was laced onto her face that he had never seen before on her. Flame, are you all right? Dimitri asked gruffly, leaning down in front of her. Miserably, she nodded. Slowly, she began to speak. Byleth, something happened, and I don't know what, but he was taken by some dark magic. Dimitri frowned. Taken by dark magic? Not attacked. She shook her head, wiping more tears away. We were walking after he woke up, when all of a sudden a massive seal opened beneath us. He pushed me out of the way, and when it closed, he was gone. Edelgard put a finger to her chin. A magical seal, can you replicate it if you had paper? Flame was quiet for a long moment. Maybe? I promise I will try my best. Please, just try to find out what happened to him. Claude nodded. If we can see that seal, we can reverse engineer it and see if we can't find out where it took him. They managed to get her in front of a table with a quill in her trembling hands. Slowly, she drew, pausing to think. The seal was only about half done when her pause grew to over 30 seconds. Everything all right there, Munchkin? Flame pouted up at Claude. I apologize, but I was very stressed when we were under attack. Please forgive me for having poor memory. Claude raised his hands in surrender. All right, I was just checking. No need to get feisty. Edelgard smiled somewhat sympathetically. Take as long as you need. While time is of the essence, I understand why you may have trouble remembering. Don't focus on Byleth. He will absolutely be fine. The Ashen Demon wouldn't die easily. Instead, try to focus on everything that happened around that time. Think about the conversations you held, the things you saw. If you remember those things, the entire picture should make itself clearer. Flame drew a shuddering breath, and she closed her eyes. After a long moment, she opened her eyes and slowly began to sketch again. As the minutes dragged on and the drawing grew more and more clear, Edelgard's frown only deepened more and more. At the sight of that, Dimitri's worry only spiked higher and higher. If Edelgard, who was the absolute strongest person he had ever known, felt unease at the sight of it, then there was perhaps reason to fear for Byleth after all. The Ashen Demon and himself were, truthfully, only barely on remotely close terms. To call them friends would perhaps be a stretch, but he truly enjoyed the man's company. Having him around made one feel as though they were in the presence of an ancient and esoteric being, in some ways. With that being said, however, the last thing he wished for was for him to be swallowed up by the darkness of the Agarthans. The flap to Flayn's tent opened, and Hubert and Monica stepped inside. "My lady, I have brought her. May I ask what exactly you wish from Dash?" Hubert cut himself off, staring at the seal that was on Flayn's paper. Monica gasped at the sight of it. Dimitri crossed his arms. "Judging by those reactions, I'm going to guess that this seal isn't something positive." Hubert chuckled, low and deep. "That is certainly one way of putting it, Your Highness. Now, where did someone like you see something like that and walk away from it?" His venomous tongue was angled towards Flayn, and she flinched. "Hey, now, it's not the time for all of that. How about you just tell us what it does, and then we can all move on from there, yeah?" Claude offered, and Hubert glared. "I don't believe you truly understand the gravity of this situation, Dash. Hubert, please. This is important for all of us." Edelgard assuaged, and after a long moment, Hubert relented. Monica was the one to speak. "That seal is something deadly, something the Agarthans save for only the highest risk targets. If you saw it being used, that means they really wanted someone gone, and that magic doesn't miss. It's actually more likely to draw in random passerby than anything else. I'd say you were lucky to see it and still be on this mortal plane." A horrific rock dropped in his stomach. "So that means Dash?" Hubert cut him off, his tone low. "This magic uses the blood of an immortal Agarthan to draw someone into the darkness of Zaras, an entirely separate plane of existence that cannot be reached under any normal circumstances. The only ways to draw them back out are to repeat the process and pray that they are nearby in a dimension of near-infinite darkness when the portal opens for a few seconds at most, or for the person inside to destabilize the magic within Zaras enough to open a new portal to the outside on their own, neither of which can be accomplished without ancient magic." Flayn was white as a sheet. "Then, that means Dash. If a companion of yours was drawn into this seal, then you're never going to see them again," Hubert told her matter-of-factly. There was silence in the tent for a long, oppressive moment as the horror of that statement set in, before Monica elbowed Hubert. "Hey, learn some tact. You're never gonna impress Her Majesty if you keep on being a downer like that. What he means is that the notes we found never mentioned any way of retrieving someone from Zaras because they never wanted to take someone out of there once they already paid a high price to send them there in the first place. I'm sure if you just give us some time, we can work out how to find someone, at the very least." Hubert glared at her. "The reason I did not mention that was because that sort of research could take years when dealing with uncertain magic. When dealing with the level of darkness that Zaras contains, well, I certainly do not wish to sacrifice my life for such a meager cause." "So, there's no way to save Byleth for the moment, is what you're saying?" Claude asked quietly. Hubert hummed. "For the Ashen Demon, I could be convinced to work faster. Perhaps he has power of his own that we are unaware of. He will either free himself or perish alone in the darkness, and we can do nothing to change that fate for the moment. It certainly won't happen until after we secure Gareg Mach. A location of relative safety will be needed. Hanuman would be a welcome addition, if we can locate him." Slowly, Dimitri nodded. "Once we take Gareg Mach, you will have all of Faerghus mages at your disposal, if you so wish. I refuse to abandon him to his fate. To that end, we must hurry and finish this attack as soon as possible." Edelgard crossed her arms. "Our timing is critical here, Dimitri. We'll lose more than the Ashen Demon if we rush things. As much as I don't wish to work with Rhea, she's a key component of this assault. We attack too early and we lose too many, too late, and the knights will get overwhelmed and we get stuck at the gate." Claude laughed a little bit, placing his hands on his hips. "All right, yeah, I agree with Edelgard and all, but this isn't really the place to be having this conversation. How about we all just go and get to the war room, or at least out of the tent?" It's a little crowded here. Monica glanced around, seeming to realize just at that moment that there were 6 people in a tent made for perhaps 3 at most. I'll take my leave, Lady Edelgard. Come on, Hubert, we've got work to do. Hubert turned to Edelgard. Before I take my leave, Lady Edelgard, would you like me to continue work on my previous task or focus on freeing the Ashen Demon? Edelgard paused at that, looking somewhat concerned. Dimitri didn't have the level of caution necessary to press the point of whatever nefarious task she may have given the Vestra. He would simply have faith that it wasn't meant to harm them. Focus on your original task. It holds more immediate weight. Don't disregard the Ashen Demon, however he may be critical to the war effort. And keep the fact that the demon was abducted confidential for now. We don't want to cause a panic, and the mere fact that he might be with us will deter Thales, if only slightly. Hubert nodded, allowing himself to be dragged by Monica. I shall take my leave, then. With that, it was only the 4 of them, although Edelgard seemed to be about to leave herself. Taking one final glance at the seal, she reached for the tent flap. It was all my fault, Flame spoke quietly. The 3 lords all seemed to pause at the same time, turning to regard the young girl. Excuse me? Edelgard asked. I took him out on a walk shortly after he awoke. He was exhausted, but I insisted, since I wanted to talk to him. If I didn't dash. Claude interjected, his voice smoother and lower than normal. It was clearly meant to be reassuring, but Dimitri wasn't entirely sure it hit that mark, especially not for someone who was clearly panicking, like Flame. Hey, now, there's no need to go around assigning blame to yourself for things that you can't control. Sometimes, things just happen, you know? You didn't put him at any more risk for doing that. If anything, he's probably happy that you did it, because then, he knows he can fight without worrying about anyone else. But I dash, red-hot, blotchy tears were starting to roll down her face, and Dimitri was starting to wonder what he should do with his hands. Should he simply keep his distance, attempt to comfort her, leave? Look, the world will hit ya with a sucker punch every now and then, right? There's no way to see them coming, and when you get hit by them, the only thing you can do is roll with them. When you get bad news, you have to work so that it doesn't happen again. When you get good news, you have to fight to keep it coming. If you lose the people you care for, the people you love, then the only thing you can do is keep going. You're a strong girl, Flame. You know as well as I do that this wasn't your fault. Now come on, stop crying, okay? If you want, I'll let you have a ride on my wyvern. She's friendly, I promise. He cracked a grin, and Flame let out an absurd little sound at it. I do not think you are very well versed in comfort, Claude, she managed to get out. His smile cracked somewhat. Ah, well, it is what it is. Sure you don't want that wyvern ride, though? She's been getting real antsy, and dash. Dimitri turned his attention away from Claude as he saw quiet movement in the corner of his eye. He frowned as he watched Edelgard leave the tent. The issue with Byleth would have to wait. He wanted to rush in and try to secure a safe place for their mages to work, but he knew he had to wait. If he moved too early now, everything would collapse and fall down, all of his plans becoming rubble underneath his hands. Hesitantly, he cast his eyes between Claude and Edelgard, wondering if he should stay here and attempt to help Claude out of a sticky situation or if he should attempt to speak to Edelgard one final time. Slowly, he shook his head, and left the tent. Edelgard, he started. She paused in her walking, turning to glance at him, placing a hand on her hip. What is it, Dimitri? Was there something else? Even now, her tone was so guarded. He wondered if he could ever scale the impenetrable walls she had built around herself to see what she was truly thinking. If he could only talk her down, perhaps he wouldn't need to settle things at Garreg Mach after all. May we speak? Properly, I mean. Gerald sighed, watching as his merry little band of mercenaries flitted about. You all right there, Captain? He turned around, meeting Alois' eyes. Yeah, fine. Just worried about the kid. They said that he collapsed after the battle. Just want to get back and check on him soon. Alois gasped. Oh, Captain, you can leave all this to me. You go and check on him, I'll hold down the fort here. Geralt narrowed his eyes at Alois. The man was good-hearted and high-spirited, but those two weren't always a good combo when paired with a man of Alois' dubious intelligence. Not to say that he was stupid, but he just didn't have the type of experience that Geralt did over the years. Aloud was just too impressionable for his own good. "Thanks, Alois, but I think I'm needed here for the moment. Captain, I understand full well what it's like to worry about your family. My wife worries about me every day, and that's not even mentioning my daughter. Why, every time I see her, she dash. Wait, hold on, did you leave behind your wife and child to come join me?" Geralt asked, suddenly very thrown off. Alois blinked, looking somewhat surprised. "If anything, I only left behind the knights to come join you. I've gotten more time to myself while working under you to go see them than I ever got under them." A headache brewed quickly. He really didn't have the energy to argue that point. He was getting way too old to be lecturing a guy like Alois about responsibility. "That's not whatever. You know what, sure, I'll go see him. Keep track of everything, Alois, and that means making sure that they don't pilfer any more post-battle rewards than we're owed." "Understood. I hear you loud and clear, Captain." He wondered if he was making a mistake as he headed back into the camp proper. There sure were a lot of brats at work out here, he noted. Some of them were polishing armor, some of them were brushing the horses. All of them seemed relatively calm as they worked, although it was clear that some of them were better at it than others. He made his way to the infirmary tent, waving half-heartedly to anyone who called out greetings to him. That damn reputation of his was finally starting to catch up to him. One day, those old bones of his would crack under its weight. Entering the tent, he saw that one girl from the kingdom was scurrying about. He struggled to remember her name off the top of his head. There were way too many people in this camp. It was hard enough to remember the strike force, and they were the ones who still owed them money, and a lot of it at this point. "Hey, Geralt began awkwardly. The girl paused in her work, glancing up to meet his eyes. After a moment, her name clicked in his mind. Mercedes, right? He'd run into her in Fhirdiad once or twice before when he wasn't out on a job. "Yes? How can I help you, Captain Geralt?" she asked pleasantly, putting down a needle and some stitching. "I won't take much of your time, promise. Just looking to check up on my kid," he told her, rubbing the back of his head. He knew she was busy after the battle, and even the best of fighters knew not to mess with their healer. "Oh, Byleth? He may have been discharged earlier. Flayn was taking care of him, and I saw them walking out a while ago. He recovered rather fast. It must come from you," she giggled quietly, not noticing how his expression dropped. "Flayn? Sitha's sister? Damn it, what are the church planning now? Did you see where they went? He hasn't come to see me yet if he's out and about?" Geralt asked, stress starting to build within him. Mercedes shook her head. "I'm sorry, but I don't know. I've been busy for quite some time. Since Flayn isn't back yet, I would check Flayn or Sitha's tents first before you went on a wild goose chase. If the two of them aren't in either of those places, then I would check his own tent. He may have just been tired, and infirmary beds are a hot commodity around here." She gave him a small smile. Geralt nodded woodenly. "Got it. Thanks for your time." If there was one thing to say about Flayn, it was that she seemed like the more innocent and naive members of the church. He highly doubted that she was aware of, or rather, a major part of, any plot that Rhea cooked up. He knew that Rhea had done something to Byleth, the way she acted after his birth, the fact that he had no heartbeat, his lack of emotions, that damn hair. It was all too telling for his comfort. He'd tried his best to keep him out of her clutches, but at the same time, if he told Byleth too much about his past, or even anything at all, then he may end up going to Rhea on his own. He just wanted to get this job over with and get on the road again, and then he would tell him everything. Flayn's innocence was the only thing that kept him from sprinting through camp in search of his son. That didn't mean that he wasn't worried, though. He still moved with more urgency than was normal, and he ended up bumping past several people that he would have to apologize to later. The first obvious place to check was Flayn's tent. If she wasn't there, he would go to the kid's tent. Hopefully, Everything was normal and she just wanted to check up on his physical condition after the battle. That hope was dashed when he opened the door to Flane's tent and found her miserably curled up in her chair with nobody in sight. He didn't bother with the pleasantries. What happened to Byleth? He knew his voice was coarse and rough. He didn't care. Flane hiccuped before she began to speak. They took him. Shay took him somewhere else with some magic seal. Hubert knows what it is. They took him? What do you mean, they took him? And you just let it happen? It happened too fast for me to do anything. It was like warping magic, but it felt worse, and dash. You know what, just be quiet. Gerald snapped, and Flane shut her mouth. Her eyes were red and blotchy. It was hard to fake that type of thing. Oh, a lot of girls tried, but he could always see through it. She looked genuinely upset. So this whole thing wasn't intentional on her part. She probably did have some reason to drag him out of the tent, but that commander, Shay, was probably acting on her own after attacking his son again. Flane said that Hubert knew what that seal was, which meant that the emo was the next person to talk to. Gerald grit his teeth, hurrying out of the tent, ignoring Flane's questioning cry. Finding Hubert wasn't the hard part. As much as the Vestra loved being in the shadows, he was really easy to find when you just looked for the people around him. That loud orange one, or the red-haired girl. They were like beacons just announcing his presence. He found the man in the library, hunched over a book with the red-haired one by him. They were talking in hushed tones, but he didn't really feel bad when he walked up and began to talk. Hey. I need to talk to you. Hubert glanced up at him, the two of them stopping what they were doing. How may I help you, Blade Breaker? Don't play dumb with me. I know what happened to Byleth. You're gonna tell me exactly what the deal is, now. Hubert's mouth turned up in a small grin. Monica gave him a warning glance. I am sorry, but my lady has requested that I keep such information confidential. His hand clasped rather easily around Hubert's throat, and he bodily yanked the boy out of his seat. The chair went clattering to the floor, and Monica rose to her feet, hands hovering over the tome on her waist. Look, I don't really like to beat up on people younger than me, but I don't have time to play this song and dance. Now, what you're going to do is tell me everything you know, and then you're going to save my son, because I don't know anything about this magical nonsense, and if you can't, then I'm going to make it everyone's problem, understand? Gerald growled. Hubert weakly raised his hands towards Gerald, and the grip on his neck tightened immensely. He let out a gargled noise. Wait, stop. I'll tell you. Just let him go. Monica spoke in a hushed whisper. He noticed how everyone else in the library were staring at them with wide eyes, but he couldn't really bring himself to care. He dropped Hubert, the man coughing heavily and sucking in deep breaths. Monica spoke, her words slow and leveled. The Agarthans used extremely powerful magic to bring the Ashen Demon to a different plane of existence. We're working on a way to bring him back right now, but it'll take time to perfect it, and if we mess something up, not only could we die, but we could lose your son forever. I promise you, we will bring him back, no matter the cost. But for now, you have to let us work. Once we take Garag Mach, we'll have a safe space to work tirelessly until we manage to bring him back. Gerald let out a long sigh. 1 month. If I don't see my son's face, alive and well, in 1 month, then consequences be damned, I'll personally dismantle your whole revolution. I'm sure Rhea would be happy to have my help, especially once she finds out that you managed to lose the son of one of her oldest friends. Understood. Monica drew in a shaky breath. Understood. We won't let you down. He grit his teeth, turning around and stalking out of the library. He ignored the whispers that followed his back. Damn, what a mess. Why did they always get drawn into this kinda stuff? All he wanted was for his son to be happy and live a good life. Not, whatever was going on here. If they couldn't hold true to their word, then he would hold true to his. He absolutely would make it everyone's problem until he saw his son again. The kingdom, the Federation, the Empire, he didn't care about any of them. He'd burn them all down if it meant he could have his son back. May we speak? Properly, I mean. Edelgard narrowed her eyes, staring at Dmitri intently. Eventually, she sighed. Very well. I will humor you one last time. Despite the harshness of her words, he felt a modicum of happiness knowing he would have this chance. She led him to a secluded part of camp, where few would even consider going, let alone actually visit. Trees covered the rocky side entrance to the alcove perfectly well, and the rocks jutted out just enough to be comfortable enough to sit on. How she found that location, he did not know, and would not be asking. There was no tea for them, no barrier for their conversation. This was no friendly expedition to the woods, it was a sheer conversation, one without filter or buffer. Edelgard crossed her arms. Well? What did you wish to speak about? There are 3 things, he began slowly, although you do not have to respond for the first. Curious, she curled a hand under her chin. Asking me not to respond, I'm not simply going to sit there and let you talk at me, Dmitri. Doesn't that defeat the point of a conversation? If you wish to speak, then speak. I would be remiss to ask you to be silent. However, I do want you to fully hear me out before you get upset. Edelgard sighed. You say such things often, and yet I still find myself getting upset before you're even halfway done talking. Very well, then I did say that I would hear you out. Dmitri breathed deeply, forcing himself to bring his composure back under his control. Edelgard, when the time comes, I would like to ask you to empathize with Lady Rhea. Edelgard let out a long-suffering sigh, and she crossed her arms. From the look on her face, it seemed that he had already crossed the point of no return for her being upset. He continued, not allowing himself to become discouraged. I am not asking you to abandon your plight, far from it. From previous conversations in Fhirdiad, I have long since realized that such a thing is impossible. You cannot live without your ideals in the same way that I cannot live without my purpose, without my duties. Edelgard, there are certain things in this world that some people find unacceptable. When faced with those things, they will choose to either cut it away or avert their eyes. What I'm asking you to do is to neither cut it away nor avert your eyes. If Lady Rhea is truly guilty of everything that you say she is, then you will never be able to avert your eyes, and she will bear that curse until the end of her days. But, at the moment when you finally have her in your grasp, when you're certain that victory is yours, I want you to attempt to empathize with her. The pair were silent for a long moment. Edelgard sighed, running a hand through her perfectly made hair. You're quite ridiculous sometimes, Dmitri. You're asking me to empathize with a monster after I've already won. At that point, what use is there for me to give sympathy? The dead won't accept that sympathy, and the living even less. To sacrifice all that I have only to allow Rhea to go and live a calm and peaceful life in the mountains, even if I could accept that, how would the Empire? How would all the people whose lives have been permanently altered by the Church, by the war? No, when there is a high cost, there must be a high reward. The most sympathy I can afford Rhea is to allow her to rot in the dungeons until the end of time. He couldn't say that response was unexpected. It was somewhat disappointing, yes, but not unexpected. Sympathize? No, I couldn't possibly ask you to do that. All I ask is that you attempt to consider the reasoning for Lady Rhea's actions, and understand that she is just as human as you and I. Edelgard scoffed. Her actions could convince me otherwise. You're not doing a very good job at convincing me, Dmitri. Dmitri was quiet for a long moment, his fingers squeezing into his palms tightly. There was a sort of chaotic energy bursting within him, the accumulated stress starting to affect him, the voices starting to bubble up again with Edelgard in front of him. Edelgard, people will remember tragedy. They will remember loss, and they will remember their tears. Someday in the future, our people will look back on everything their forefathers have sacrificed for them, and they will be quietly content with the world they have built instead of graciously thankful that they can wake up every morning as free men. Until then, however, we will struggle, and struggle more. That struggle has taken so many lives that it cannot be calculated. I am not saying that killing Rhea will make that tragedy worse, but for the people of Faerghus, that tragedy will be cemented with her death. And I fear that tragedy will come to seek your head in time. Edelgard crossed her arms. Are you threatening me, Dmitri? He sighed. No. I am merely concerned for you. Despite everything, I would like to believe that we have grown closer, and I would wish for you to grow old and happy surrounded by friends instead of dying at the end of a sword, surrounded by nothing but enemies. Edelgard laughed sardonically, the noise containing no traces of humor. I'm afraid neither futures are in the cards for me as of yet, Dimitri. Not until this war is over. I thank you for your concern, however. Not until this war is over. So she wouldn't stop, still. He closed his eyes and let out a small sigh. In that case, he would continue on. As for my second question, what you mentioned ties directly into it. What exactly do you plan on doing once you've won the war? Edelgard blinked, looking genuinely taken aback. Once I've won the war? You sound rather confident in me, Dimitri. And besides, haven't we held this conversation before? She teased. A headache threatened to grow. Please do not dodge the question. Of course, I apologize. When I've won the war, well, for me, winning would have to involve dismantling the Central Church, and I would have to subdue much of, if not all of, Faerghus for the reasons you, yourself, have told me. If possible, I would like to bring all of Fodlan under one unified banner. Convincing Claude to give up his lands would be nigh impossible, so I was thinking of other ways. Dimitri perked up. Ah, are you considering an arranged marriage? Edelgard blinked, clearly taken aback, but Dimitri continued on. Truthfully, I doubt that there would be a better person for you out there. Claude is incredibly intelligent, he's wealthy and powerful enough to aid you when needed, and Dimitri, Edelgard began quietly, I'm afraid that I was not thinking of such a thing, although it's strange to hear that you've given Claude your blessings. His face flushed. My apologies, I overstepped. Claude and I once discussed something of a similar nature, although I imagine that he was doing it more as a jest than an actual suggestion. Why, he even suggested that I arrange one with you while you were still weakened, right after you awoke in Fhirdiad. At that sentence, she almost completely stalled out. Wait, and you didn't ? She cut herself off, and Dimitri stared at her, uncomprehending. Slowly, one by one, the puzzle pieces began to slot into place. Edelgard, did you believe that I wished to court you? There was a slight flush on her face. You treated me exceptionally well, for no apparent reason outside of my information. When you'd extracted all I was willing to give you, that treatment continued. Had another noble attempted it, I would have easily believed they were just somewhat pathetic attempts to court me. That was absolutely mortifying. The thought of attempting to court Edelgard, his sister, sent shivers of revulsion down his spine. Claude's suggestion of arranged marriage, months ago now, hadn't garnered much thought in him because he knew that Claude was unaware of the fact that Edelgard and Dimitri were step-siblings. The idea was harmless, and a marriage could be loveless, although it would be no marriage for him. The emotional connection he had built with Edelgard during their short stay together in Fhirdiad as children had created a permanent wedge between any romantic feelings that may ever develop. He almost scrambled to correct her misconception. Please, trust me, I do not wish to court you. Cast the thought from your mind immediately. I merely wished to provide well for you because we fought together, and you were a confidant for a time. That is all. Edelgard huffed, straightening out her clothing. While my pride has taken somewhat of a hit, that is some weight off of my mind. Anyways, you've distracted me. My plans for the future, I've said that I wish for a unified Fodlan, yes. He nodded, and she continued. Once I unify Fodlan, there are a number of things to be done. Firstly, the crest system that has been implemented for so long has to be removed. People will be able to rise above their stations with merit alone, not based on their blood. Those with crests will not be discriminated against. If a person is genuinely the best pick for a role and also happens to have a crest, then they shall not be disregarded just for it, but those who hold positions just because of their family will lose that right immediately. Dimitri hummed. I see. Edelgard's eyes were somewhat downcast. Once the Agarthans and Rhea are gone, I think, I'll finally have done it. Building a world free of gods or masters, free from oppressors, where every person can carve their own path with their own hands. That sounds wonderful to me. It's something that I know, that all of the Empire wish for. A spark of hope flickered in his chest. Carve your own path. Those words. He had said something similar to her on a bright morning in Fhirdiad, when they were children. Had those words stuck with her, all the way until now? He shook his head lightly, and she glanced up at him. Tell me, Dmitri, if you were the one to win this war, what would you do? He startled, caught off guard. Winning the war wasn't something he had ever thought about, honestly. His thoughts on it. If I won the war, and somehow united all of Fodlan, I believe I would try to help the weak. He offered. Edelgard stared up at him, unimpressed. That's a rather flimsy resolve coming from you. Don't you have any concrete ambitions? Dmitri tilted his head back, staring up at the leaf canopy above. His ambitions. When I was young, he began, I was involved in the tragedy of Duskur. Edelgard nodded. I've heard. The tragedy led to much lost life. It's good that you're taking action to remedy that, regarding Duskur. He nodded in agreement, and continued. I should have died during the tragedy, and it was only thanks to one of my family's knights, Gustav, that I survived at all, not to mention the many men and women who gave their lives for me. All my life, I have been tracking down the conspirators of that act. Minor lords, Agarthants, even my own stepmother was involved in it. The breadth of that betrayal ran deep, and I fear I would have been completely lost without the guidance I received from those around me. My friends taught me how to rely on others again, how to allow them into my heart when I had perhaps almost permanently shut it, and Rodrigue was like a second father to me, even at a detriment to his own relationship with Felix. Even Gustav suffered for nothing. The depth of his self-flagellation over not being able to save my father ran deep. He refused to see to his own daughter, Annette, until recently. They've had the opportunity to reconnect, but all of those years lost have their toll. Edelgard was glum in her response. Such a large event would naturally cause such a large backlash. It's a shame how much you had to suffer for it, and yet, through all of that, you became stronger. Strong enough to be considered one of the largest threats on the battlefield and a demon to face strategically. You cut your own path forward, and that's how we stand here now, talking face to face. Dmitri sat down on one of the jutting rocks, staring at his hands. Edelgard, I am weak. I am perhaps the weakest man within my army. Without this cursed blood that runs through my veins, I imagine I would be nothing. It is only thanks to it that I managed to meet the wonderful people I did, and it is only thanks to it that I managed to stand before you now. The goddess is cruel in that manner. Only by sheer chance was I granted the chance to be trusted, to be loved. Others are far more virtuous, far less blood-stained, and yet their accomplishments will never be written, their deeds will never be sung, their works will fade to time. What I want, my ambition, it is to create a world where even the weak, where even the worst and the best of men, can receive the helping hand they require to pull themselves from the ground and become better. Now, after saying all of that, Edelgard was regarding him far more critically. There are some people who can't be forgiven, and some grudges that can't be forgotten. That's idealistic at best, Dmitri. Dmitri glanced back up to her imposing form. The goddess will never reach her hand to us personally, Edelgard. Her light will never reach those who are buried in the swamp of malevolence that drowns this world by the day. The only ones who can pull us out are each other. Only by working together, only by joining hands and placing our faith in each other, can we stay afloat. For example, I gave Miklon a chance because I believed that even he, even a man who could be, by all rights, considered an abuser and a brigand, could turn his life around, could apologize with his actions and his words if only he was given the correct incentive, if he was only given the proper environment free from the burdens of the system that is in place. Not every apology will be accepted, especially not from a victim of something abhorrent. Edelgard warned him, and he grit his teeth, frustrated. I'm aware, but that's still no excuse to not try. I do not speak of a world where the wicked go unpunished and the good go unrewarded, but those who truly desire to make a change should be facilitated so that they can do so, regardless of who they are. I did not expect Sylvain to accept the apology that came from Miklon, but I hoped that I could eventually give the man a chance to mend their relationship, to begin rebuilding that burned bridge. While I could not even consider rebuilding the bridge for him, I could hand him the logs and give him the axe. Dmitri, the idea is only good in isolation. For a certain few, the opportunity to push aside your past sins with work is appealing, but many would rather die than do so, and even if they do, there's no guarantee that they won't just fail to rehabilitate. However, I can't say that I don't see the logic. When it comes to the weak, it's a point of contention for me. I can't figure out how to give aid to the weak effectively while also enabling the strong to rise and take a position that is suited for them. It is difficult. His heart yearned for her to understand him, to pick up on the words he was and wasn't saying. That is all I could ask, that you consider them. You know, in a way, we are rather similar, are we not? Edelgard frowned, her eyebrows creasing together. That's rather bold of you to say, all things considered. How exactly are we similar? Dmitri mindlessly traced the edge of the rock with a finger. Our beliefs, my thoughts on the crest system, on our future, they mirror yours in a way. My biggest regret is failing to see that sooner, for failing to reach a compromise. Edelgard tooted. No compromise would have worked between us, Dmitri. You're the king of Faerghus. I'm aware of the chokehold that Rhea has you in right now. The only thing you can change is how much you try to struggle out of it. Mirthlessly, he laughed. Indeed. Although, I suppose there's no need for me to struggle at all. Just as I am in a chokehold, the church is in an equally tight one coming from myself. Without our support, they are dead in the water, much the same as Faerghus. Edelgard was quiet for a long moment. Dmitri. All things considered, there's no reason for us to fight. Once I sit upon the throne of Inbar and take back my empire, then I swear, so long as you stay out of my way when I fight Rhea, I will aid Faerghus as much as I can. You shouldn't be forced to help someone you don't agree with. You're a political hostage, and from all you've done, I can tell that you deserve better. He shook his head. Edelgard, that does mean very much to me. However, I cannot accept your offer. Lady Rhea, despite everything I've heard, is a genuinely kind and good person. Her actions, even if you speak the truth, she has been nothing but generous towards me and my people. They cannot forget her kindness. Her presence is a plaster that is woven too tight to remove in one fell swoop. Faerghus will bleed out if you do. When you finally make your move to fight Lady Rhea, then I'm sorry, but that is the moment you become my enemy once more. His declaration hung between them for a long moment. Edelgard looked disappointed. I see. So you're siding with Rhea over me. You will understand, at some point. In a manner, I suppose that is true. In another, it is as far from it as possible. Until that happens, however, then I will resolutely remain by your side. How reassuring, she snarked. Dmitri closed his eyes, and sighed. I do not believe there is any more use in pursuing this topic. I apologize, Edelgard, but I do not think this is something we can see eye to eye on for the moment. Yes, I agree you have made your stance clear, and I have done the same. You said that there were 3 things that you wished to know, correct? What is the third? Her voice was calm and measured. What, exactly, have the Agarthans done to you? Silence. Edelgard didn't seem angry, or upset. Merely, weary. I doubt you can understand just how invasive that question is. He grit his teeth. Then I will beg your forgiveness afterwards rather than back down now. This is something that I must know, Edelgard. She stared at him, wariness etched into her features, before she let out a long-suffering sigh. Slowly, she unclasped the armor that sat around her arm, letting it clatter to the ground. She rolled her sleeve back, and exposed her bare arm to him, and anger suffused him. There were long, angry patches of scars that ran across her arm, made with surgical precision. They ran in ugly, sometimes irrational diagonals, and they dug past the sections she had exposed to him. Have they dash? My entire body is like this, Dmitri. My torso is the worst of it, but I will not be exposing that to you. Not today, not ever. They took me when I was young and experimented on me heavily. Enhanced me, tortured me, brought me low and forced me to beg for something, anything, just so I could stay alive. They did the same to all of my brothers and sisters. I watched it happen. All for this. And then, She raised her hand, and an imprint of a crest appeared above it. His breath caught in his throat. That's Dash. This is the crest of flames, and the second of 2 crests in my blood. They caused me so much pain, so much suffering, for something as trivial as a crest. Then this is the reason you hate the crest system so much. She nodded slowly. Correct. Aside from the obvious issues with it, had that system not existed, then perhaps they never would have experimented on me, would never have forced my brothers and sisters through that pain before they callously discarded them. Or perhaps they would have. I am far from the only person they have experimented on. Their sick obsession with crests has driven them to madness beyond what you could ever comprehend, Dimitri. Their actions are far from reasonable, far from understandable, far from forgivable. I will fight until they fall, for Fadlan will never be free so long as they live. They're reprehensible, and I wholeheartedly believe that they must be exterminated. There was a sick feeling in his stomach. I could not agree with you more, Edelgard. They are the ones who instigated the tragedy of Duskur, who infiltrated my country and my people, who killed the Saintess Cornelia and wore her face for decades, and so much more. I could not bring myself to forgive them for any of their crimes if I tried. They are reprehensibly evil, and cannot be allowed to continue as they are. If I ever get the chance, then I will absolutely sever their heads from their shoulders, crush them, make them suffer. Edelgard sighed. There's that boorish nature of yours springing up again. Is that a result of how the tragedy of Duskur affected you? Try not to get too distracted out there. If you become a loose cannon, I won't hesitate to put you down, regardless of what the consequences might be. He hummed. The tragedy, it would be impossible for me to say that I was unaffected, yes. Just as your scars stayed with you, so too did mine. My hands are burned, and my mind, well, perhaps it would be safe to call it unstable. Edelgard narrowed her eyes. Unstable. My sense of taste has long since fled me, as I'm sure Didu has told you. What he hopefully did not mention were the visions. The ghosts. Traces of people who are long gone. They scream at me, beg me to take action, to take revenge, to kill and maim and murder. They are only quiet when I fight, when adrenaline flees me from my reasoning. I have lived with them since that day, and will likely live with them forevermore. I am sorry to hear that. He chuckled lowly. I did not tell you for your pity, merely for your understanding. When I dash forwards in an almost suicidal rage, it is not because I calculated the action and believed it to be the best path forward, it is because I can no longer resist the voices I hear. I won't accept that as an excuse if you're the one who causes us to fail. Edelgard warned, crossing her arms. Neither will I, Dimitri admitted, which is why I will do my best to maintain my composure. You do not have to worry about me. I shall only be a blade pointed at the enemy, and I refuse to die before my time. Slowly, Edelgard nodded her assent. It seems that both of us have much resentment to vent for the Agarthans. I am glad to have you on my side, at least for now. However, I fear that we have been too far from camp for far too long. I imagine Claude is getting quite concerned. Even if he isn't, I don't want to leave him unsupervised for too long. Dimitri managed to crack a smile. While I do trust him, I do not think that it is quite a good idea to leave him alone, no. We ought to hurry. She stood, already beginning to leave, and Dimitri paused. Watching her back, he felt almost compelled to speak. Edelgard, he said, almost slipping, and calling her El. She turned, glancing at him curiously. Yes? Was there something else? For a moment, he was truly curious. He wanted to ask, truly wanted to know if she remembered their time together as children, if she remembered the tender moments they shared when they were young. If she remembered how they had met, if she remembered the oath of the dagger. Faced with the weight of those questions and of her gaze, he found his tongue tied, unable to speak. No, forgive me. It is nothing. Let us return. She scoffed. Very well, then. Don't fall behind. He stood, reaching her side with his longer strides easily, and she almost huffed at the difference in speed. He looked up at the sky, something warm and fragile in his heart. If this talk bore fruit, then I can only hope that the future she wishes for is a just one, where the meek will be preserved while the road forwards can be paved for the strong. Perhaps we can, eventually, reach out a hand to each other. Perhaps my plans were futile from the start, unnecessary even to myself. All he wanted was peace, for all people, and he would fight so that he could grant that peace. Chapter 14, Chromatic Star Scores to Settle. The march to Garreg Mach was a somber one. Dimitri was rattled at not having Shay's guidance or Byleth's reliability at his side. It felt as though he were charging forth into a battlefield he failed to understand, regardless of how often he had fought or the experience he carried under his belt. For the past 6 months, he had always had the aid of one or the other, aside from certain special occasions. The worst part was, this would be the most critical battle, the best place to have at least one of them present. Garreg Mach was an incredibly difficult to penetrate monastery, and the presence of the Agarthans in their previous battle meant that they were certainly aware of their actions. It was undoubtedly clear to him that Thales would be present. What that meant for the battle ahead, he was unsure. Lady Rhea was likely aware of the danger present, but to what extent, he could not say. And if Thales was there, were they strong enough to win on their own? He had resoundingly beaten both Edelgard and himself alone last time. While the two of them had certainly grown stronger, Edelgard only had a short window of time to recover, let alone build her strength further. He doubted his own growth in strength would be enough to beat the Agarthan, if Shay was anything to go by. No, there was no purpose to continuing this line of thought. He would have to be strong enough. There was no second option, no other way forward. He would win, or he would die fruitlessly. Garreg Mach would be theirs today, of that, there was no doubt. Edelgard and Claude were at his side. He felt confident in saying that there was no enemy that could defeat them easily. Their strategies were varied, and Claude helped build them from the ground up. This was perhaps one of the easiest battles they should have so far. The monastery would be infiltrated and opened from the inside. The imperial garrison had been scattered with Agir's death, and the Agarthans were limited in number, with Mycen drawing some of their best to the western front, which had been long since abandoned. They held the advantage numerically and strategically, and there was an overabundance of morale among the troops now that their enemy was solidified. And yet, despite all of that, anxiety plagued him. The voices were growing louder the closer they grew to Garreg Mach. Telling him to drop the farce, to kill Edelgard, to end everything now instead of later. Telling him that his ideals were false, that his actions could never hope to compare, that he was better off as a beast. It was growing harder and harder to ignore them. He didn't want to kill Edelgard in the slightest, and yet, they kept urging him to. His thoughts on her world were mixed. They were so close to reaching a consensus, and yet, there was an impossibly large gap between them, one far too large to reach a hand over. Her ideal world involved stripping the people of the lives they had fought so hard to earn, of forcing them to accept her ideals and systems. While those ideals may have been just, even benevolent, it would still be far too large a change for many to survive. Her future would be propped on a mountain of corpses, and he was unsure if it was even possible to sway her from that future. It would certainly be impossible with his words alone. Something bumped into his shoulder, and he shook himself from his mind. "Bullion for your thoughts?" Claude asked, elbowing him in the side. "I am merely thinking of Edelgard. About the upcoming confrontation, about the world she wishes to create," he said softly, staring forward at their forces as they marched. Claude frowned. "You know, I'm still not okay with this plan of yours. It's insane, and foolhardy at best. You have no idea if it'll work or not. Even so, there's nothing else I can do. Her path is set no matter what, I must deter her from it, even if only slightly." Claude let out a long-suffering sigh. Should have known you would be stubborn until the end. Well, you came to the right person, I guess. Nobody else could get this for you in time. Here. It's what you asked for earlier." Claude reached out a hand, and Dimitri grabbed the item within easy reach. It was small, and could easily hide within his armor. Dimitri stared down at it, his eyes crinkling in a sardonic smile. This would make all the difference in the upcoming fight. "Don't look too happy about it, your kingliness. Remember that it'll hurt like hell when you use that." Dimitri nodded. "That is the price that I must pay." "It is quite all right, Claude. I am certain that this is the only path forward. Claude just frowned at him, and for what it was worth, Dmitri did feel somewhat bad. He had roped Claude into his one-sided plans, forced him to acquiesce to his demands, even when the other man had protested. He hoped this was enough. Enough to where that final confrontation could end his way. The gates of Gareg Mach were close, practically only a stone's throw away. The monastery had never looked so imposing before, not even on the day they all first arrived. There were already sounds of fighting coming from within. Almost as if on cue, as their armies arrived, the gates began to creak open. On the other side stood Catherine, somewhat battered, and Seath, still atop his wyvern. "Hey, King Dmitri. What took you so long, brat?" Catherine cracked a joke, twirling Thunderbrand to take out a soldier attacking from behind. Dmitri managed a smile at the sight. He cleared his throat, and raised his voice. "Everyone, remember the plan. All forces, move out. We will retake the monastery here and now." At his side, Edelgard hung her axe high, the hero's relic glistening in the sunlight. "Today, we'll reclaim the monastery, tomorrow, the empire. Black Eagles strike force, with me. We'll win this day." There was uproarious cheering from behind, and with a raise of the lance, the final battle began. The barrier to entry for Gareg Mach had been opened. With that, all three of their armies had been allowed to pour through. Claude's absence was both expected and planned for, but Lorenz was an equally capable leader. Gareg Mach would fall today. Seath reached his side quickly as the blue lions poured forth. "King Dmitri, the enemy presence here is far higher than expected." The Agarthans seemed to have made their move. Dmitri nodded, a feral grin on his face as he swept into battle. "I am aware. We will rout them all the same. They will not leave here alive." His lance swept out, the crackling energy of the relic bursting forth in a paraselene around him, as though he was an azure moon hanging in the sky. 30 soldiers fell in an instant. Catherine whistled, her blade striking out at immense speeds. "Save some for the rest of us, there." He couldn't bring himself to respond, too focused on calming the raging fury in his heart. Gareg Mach was built to be a rather simple, straightforward monastery. It was also incredibly easy to defend, although not on the level of Arianrod. They would have some minor difficulties in bursting through, had they not concocted this plan in this manner. The strike force would head north, and the Federation and Kingdom would go south, where the Kingdom would eventually break off to head to the center and all three armies would break through to the cathedral to aid Lady Rhea. Had they the option, they would have chosen to break through the center directly, but that was a route still closed to them for the moment. With their sheer numbers, there was no need for them to fight conservatively. They overwhelmed the enemy before them with wild abandon, securing the first 3 strongholds with ease. In retaliation, from behind the second set of gates, dark knights galloped out. "There is a leader to the north. They will likely not open the gates to intercept us properly until we defeat all of them." Seath shouted over the din of battle. "We'll leave it to Edelgard, then. Strike down the enemy before us." Dmitri roared, rushing forward with a massive leap. A lance came to meet his charge, and for a small moment, Dmitri held fear for his own life. However, with a burst of speed, a shield knocked the weapon aside, and Eredbar's strike landed true, cutting down the first Dark Knight where he stood. "Can't leave you alone for a second without you doing something foolish, can I? If you want to die, do it on your own time." Felix roared, cutting down 3 more soldiers, his back touching Dmitri's. "Felix, it's good to have you at my back. Come, let's show them the might of Faerghus," he bellowed, raising his lance. Felix scoffed, shifting. "If that's the plan, then we'll cut through." Tactic engaged, the king's shield set Dmitri and Felix loose on the enemy. Aim struck out, its overwhelming force striking straight through the enemy in front of her. Edelgard huffed. The stories of the hero's relics sapping the lifespan of the user seemed to be true. She'd spoken with Lysithea about that fact, but it was a different matter entirely to experience it for herself. She couldn't imagine what that girl had experienced, having used 2 relics at once for a short time. Now, Thyrsis was in Lorenz's hands, and she would continue to live for a short while longer. Doing all right there, Red Emperor." A sardonically amused voice called from behind, and an arrow whizzed past her head to strike a soldier aiming for her with magic. She nodded gratefully for the assistance. "I will be fine, Shamir, thank you for your reassurance. I'd like this battle to be over with as soon as possible, however." From somewhere behind them, Bernadetta wailed her agreement, and Edelgard sighed. As they claimed the stronghold, however, the gates forward opened and a familiar face galloped out on a horse. Anaximandros, she grit her teeth. An Agarthan general that she knew well. She raised her axe and charged forth. "Ah, Lady Edelgard. Come to finally give me a challenge? Come, then. Show me how you've grown." His lance was malevolent in his hands, and anger soared within her. "I'll crumble you to ash. Anger, show him our anger." Raging storm. Her axe flashed forwards, and a massive tornado of fire instantly erupted across their space. It snaked outwards, reaching and clawing towards the Dark Knight, who reared his horse back and frantically tried to dodge. Unfortunately for him, it wasn't enough. The flame engulfed him, and he was caught up in it. He went flying, his horse whinnying in pain all the while, and Edelgard let out a huff as she picked up the pace, lashing forwards. She met Anaximandros as he landed with a sharp bash, then jumped back and tossed her axe directly at him, flames exploding outwards like a flickering flower. It split open his chest armor, and he made a low, keening noise as flames erupted over his skin. Edelgard pulled Aimer from his armor, embedded as it was, and reared it back one final time. Before she could execute one of the fiends who had tortured her so, however, there was a flash of purple as he teleported away. She grit her teeth. Damn. The gates before them opened as more rushed to intercept, and Edelgard raised her axe once more. Before she could take action, however, two figures moved to intercept. "Come, Hubert, shall we show Her Majesty the true fruits of our training? After all, I would hate for her to rest on her laurels. The twin jewels of the Empire ought to have some pride. When will you drop that inane nickname for us, Ferdinand? I'll fight with you only so long as you agree to get rid of it." "Ha! Had I known it was this easy to get your help, I would have pestered you like this far earlier. You're an insufferable fool, but a competent one all the same. Come, let us make Her Majesty proud." Tactic engaged, twin jewels of the Empire. Set Hubert and Ferdinand loose on the enemy. "Viscom!" Sylvain called out. Magical energy rained down from above, and Seath rapidly reared his wyvern back. "Rhea, please be safe." They had to hurry to the cathedral. There was no other way about it. She had not said as much, but he knew that Rhea was prepared for a final confrontation with the Agarthans, a final revenge for everything they had done. He had seen her rage on the battlefield before, and he could only imagine how long she had allowed it to fester towards those hidden enemies. Another soldier approached, and his axe flashed out. He had loaned the spear of Assel to that one boy from the Black Eagles, Ferdinand. His crest of Sickle would serve him well in regards to using it. Besides, Seath was comfortable enough with an axe in his hands that he felt he could survive without it, as proven in how he cut down a heavily armored foe with only little effort. Magical energy reigned right near him, and his wyvern screeched as he drove it forwards. "We must find the controls quickly. All of our forces are being battered by this." They broke through the first stronghold quickly. King Dimitri and Duke Frildarius fought frighteningly well together, the pair were comparable to Lug and Kifon. Could he then liken someone like Shay to Pan? Ah, but then, there was the matter of her supposed allegiance to the Agarthans, perhaps it was not a wonderful comparison after all. They disabled the first set of controls quickly, and quickly began pushing north. Their men cried out as the terrifyingly powerful technology battered them. He urged his wyvern to go faster, and men raced along the ground below. Here, they separated from the Federation. They would attack as one unit, ensuring that their assault went according to plan. The central stronghold fell quickly. With commanders like the Death Knight racing along beneath them, there was no contest for the Agarthans and beleaguered Imperial soldiers that awaited them. His axe cut through them all with ease, and magic as well as arrows rained down upon the enemy from afar. They were progressing tremendously quickly. Perhaps, if all went well. He could scarcely grant himself hope. If the monastery could belong to them once more, then perhaps they would win against their foes after all. Perhaps, through this experience, Edelgard could be dissuaded from her folly. Perhaps. He banked to the right, barely avoiding an arrow, and a bolt of lightning passed by from below. Hey, keep your focus up there, Seath. We already fought our way through most of these guys, so there's no need to worry about something as easy as this. My apologies, Catherine. I am well, I assure you. My thanks for the assist. Nah, it's no big deal. Just stick with me. Hey, let's head to the center. Before he could respond or tell her that the plan may have changed, Catherine bolted off, and he sighed, moving to follow. The foes in the direct center were somewhat more dispersed. There was no stronghold in the area, it was merely a passing station between two. Why, then, had she been so insistent on the fact? As she bolted into the northern stronghold, the answer soon became clear. He swooped into the stronghold, striking outwards towards the captain of the stronghold. Deeper within, Catherine struck out towards another soldier, and she firmly and comfortably got into formation with Shamir. You really broke formation just to come help out, huh? Shamir deadpanned. Did you expect anything less of me? We're partners. I can't just let you go off on your own like that. Ha, you're so bothersome sometimes. Well, I guess that's what I like about you. Tactic engaged, Star of the Knights. Set Shamir and Catherine loose on the enemy. The final controls for the Viscom fell under their control, and with a whirring sound, the machines powered off. Edelgard's forces marched on. They had taken control of much of the monastery thus far. Count Varley was still fighting for his life, he likely couldn't even comprehend that they weren't out to kill him specifically. Or perhaps he could, and the Agarthans promised him a fate far worse than death if he failed. Either way, the battle wasn't over yet. There was surely going to be some sort of retaliation for their actions. A messenger approached. Your Majesty, there appears to be Agarthan reinforcements inbound. Several mages and dark knights are advancing. Their previous commander is among them. Edelgard nodded. I will face Anaximandros myself. Has he come from the center? No, ma'am, from the south. The south? But that means dash. Lawrence watched, scarcely believing his eyes, as the Agarthan commander fell to a single dark spike's X from Lysithea. He didn't move after that, and the gates forward opened for them, more troops surging forth. Don't underestimate me, she growled, spittle practically flying from her mouth. He clutched Thyrsis slightly closer, feeling somewhat threatened despite her small stature and the lack of threat she posed to him directly. The gates forward creaked open, and most of the Federation practically jumped to move forward. However, such an amateur move would be unfitting of a nobleman of his degree. He raised his spear outwards, and with a commanding voice, called out, "Halt! Do not advance until I call for it." The Federation immediately stopped in their motions, and Lawrence watched carefully. Any moment now. The central plaza erupted into flames in an infernal blaze, but the two strongholds to the left and right were left untouched. Move forward. Take that stronghold. He roared, pointing his lance forward. As a unit, the Federation forces piled forwards, striking out easily and cutting through the stronghold. From across the path, he could see the strike force troops doing the same. However, there was one minor difficulty, and that was the tightness in their path. That is, it would be difficult if they had not planned for it. King Dimitri had faced the Agarthans multiple times, but more importantly, he had faced their technology multiple times. He was prepared for the tactics they would employ, and advised the Federation accordingly. Now is the time. Let loose the fusillade. Lawrence ordered, and his troops scrambled. Tactic engaged, Rain of Ash. Have the Leicester Federation's elites loose countless arrows and reduce the enemy to ash. He watched with some satisfaction as a hail of arrows blotted out the sky, and the Titanus roared as it was pelted. Countless arrows stuck out of its Agarthium plating, and countless more were sticking in. The joints creaked and wavered as arrow after arrow slammed into it, and it let out another roar, this one more defiant. The hail, however, would not stop. Only when the Titaness finally collapsed did the rain of arrows cease, and Lawrence allowed his pride to flourish as the current leader of the Federation forces. Their true leader, however, had another role to play. Claude grinned as his wyvern descended upon the stronghold. "Hey, Count Varley, bet you didn't expect anyone to scale those mountains, huh?" The man before the cathedral turned to him, an expression of pure terror in his eyes. Claude raised his bow, pity nowhere within him, and he fired. Varley screamed, dropping to the floor. The arrow flew harmlessly over him, slamming into the gate instead. The lock broke instantly, and the gates shuddered open. Varley realized what had happened just as soon as the arrow struck true. "No, no, what have you done, Dash?" Lawrence galloped into the stronghold, his forces hot on his tail. "This ends today, Count Varley. You will be receiving no quarter from us." "Good to see you, Lawrence. Let's show this guy what for, eh?" Claude hefted fail not, aiming his bow. Tactic engaged, leaders of the Federation. Set Claude and Lawrence loose on. Wait. I surrender. I surrender, just please don't kill me. I'll do whatever you want, just don't kill me. Count Varley begged, and Claude blinked. "Man, that's kinda disappointing," he bemoaned, and Lawrence scoffed. "Has our king grown so bloodthirsty that he would fail to accept a surrender? Come now, Claude, surely you do not want me taking the reins from you just yet?" Lawrence taunted. "Nah, it's just, you wouldn't get it." There were loud footsteps as the kingdom and strike force arrived. Edelgard and Dimitri gave him appraising looks, and he waved back. Bernadetta stared at her father, her eyes wide. Her father stared back, looking equally out of his element. "Bernadetta, I didn't know that you..." "Father? Oh, right, I did hear something about you being at Garreg Mach. This is all a little unexpected, I guess." She laughed nervously, her eyes darting away. Unfortunately for all of them, a messenger arrived at that very moment. "King Dimitri, there's an issue. There's a large Agarthan force descending upon us right now. This looks like the bulk of their forces. Rumors are that Mycen is among them." "Mycen? So, he couldn't hold them as long as he intended. We'll move to intercept." "Come, Claude, we'll dash." Felix jutted in. "Bor, have you learned nothing? We'll help take some of your burdens. We'll manage the outside of the monastery. You go help Rhea. From what you've said, we wouldn't be much help there anyways. Go do what you need to do. We'll be here when you get back. Just don't forget to bring the troops for that plan you talked about earlier." Dimitri stared at Felix uncertainly, Eridbar wavering in his hands. "Yes, you are right, Felix. Claude, Edelgard, let us go help Lady Rhea. She will certainly appreciate our presence." Hubert approached Edelgard. "Your Majesty, shall we?" Edelgard nodded slowly. "Yes. Black Eagle Strike Force, launch our final tactic." Tactic engaged, raging flames. Have the Black Eagle Strike Force's elites set the surrounding area ablaze. That should make it easier for you. They'll have to fight their way through waves of flame. I want a flawless victory today, no excuses will be permitted, am I to be understood, Hubert? Edelgard's voice was curt, and Hubert nodded. "I understand perfectly, my lady. We will ensure that your vision comes to pass." Edelgard turned her attention to the two of them, her eyes idly lingering on Count Varley for a sheer moment. "Let's go. It's about time we finished this, don't you think?" "I could not agree more, Edelgard," Dimitri said, his steps heavy as he opened the door to the monastery proper. Their first enemy upon entering the monastery was Kronia, a familiar face for him. Her daggers were light as she entered battle. "I won't let our future be stolen from us like this. I will enact our will, no matter what." Dimitri raised Eridbar. "How fitting that our journey began with you and will end with you. I hope you are prepared for the end, Kronia, because you will not be leaving here alive." Tactic engaged, King of Lions wave attack. Summon elites from the Holy Kingdom of Faerghus to launch an attack on an enemy. Their soldiers poured in from behind, and Kronia was instantly set upon by them. Her daggers flashed with a truly incomprehensible speed under their assault. Dimitri raced past. Come, we cannot be distracted here. Leave her for them. You got it, boss man. Claude called out chipperly, firing off a stray arrow in her direction as they passed. Understood. Edelgard called, bashing Kronia with her shield as she surged through. The woman let out a loud screech, but none of them paid her any mind. The bridge to the cathedral was large, imposingly so. All of Fodlan seemed to span out beneath them. The three of them crossed it as fast as they could allow. It's kinda calm, all things considered, wouldn't you say? Considering how the future is at stake, and all that. Claude spoke softly, his voice barely audible over the wing beats of his wyvern. Considering the past of this place, I would wager that history has been at stake multiple times here. Do not forget that we are merely a footnote for tomorrow's world, Claude. Edelgard chimed in. I'd imagine that the Garag Mach of the present has never experienced strife quite like this, however. Its hallowed walls can only withstand so much. Dimitri interjected. They were halfway over the bridge when Claude spoke again. Hey, when this battle is over, what do you say we all hold a grand feast? I'm looking forward to drinking with the two of you until the sun rises again, you know that? Of course, all on Ria's tab she'll have to thank us somehow, after all, Claude joked, cracking a smile. A headache formed behind Dimitri's eyes. Always in the mood to eat, huh Claude? I would berate you for it if I couldn't understand it myself. Edelgard gave a sharp glance to Claude. You speak as though you're trying to inspire troops going to die, Claude. Have more faith in us. We'll all survive this. I told Hubert once already that I will accept nothing less than a flawless victory. And dash. All right, princess, message received loud and clear. I guess I'll just be sullen and quiet like the two of you. I'm just trying to lighten the mood. Despite his words, Claude's eyes seemed to bore into Dimitri, and he could practically hear the words he was trying to say. You can still back out. You don't have to do this. You can still keep the peace and be happy. Except, he did have to do this. There was no other choice. Edelgard would have to see the consequences of her actions, one way or another. Bloodstained as they both were, it was impossible for them to truly reach a consensus on this. They burst through the doors to the cathedral, only to be met with a horrifying sight. Lady Ria was locked in close combat with Thales, the pews of the cathedral almost entirely torn to shreds or removed. Blood ran down her head, and her complicated gown had ripped in multiple places. Her sword and shield seemed to be moving sluggishly, and yet she still fought with immense vigor. In comparison, Thales seemed winded, his visage scuffed and his robes in disarray. Blood leaked from his mouth, and a deranged scowl had long since grown. Both fighters turned to look at the interlopers, and for a moment, the cathedral was still. Then, Claude fired an arrow, and everything was moving at a rapid pace once again. Both Lady Ria and Thales had to move to dodge the arrow, and as it flew between the pair, her fist flashed out. The punch landed square in Thales' jaw, and he staggered backwards. Lady Ria dashed forwards, raising her sword, but Thales recovered faster. Their swords clashed once more, and Dimitri raced in, Edelgard hot on his heels. Claude's wyvern shot a fireball from above, the attack racing towards both Lady Ria and Thales. She was forced to disengage once more, and Dimitri and Edelgard leapt in front of Ria, to her defense. As the fire lessened and finally dimmed, Thales stared at them with a sneer of contempt. So, Kronia has failed. I was close to killing that witch. Lady Ria, you should retreat. We will handle this one ourselves. Dimitri called out, confidence in his voice. Seeing Thales like this, there was hope. This would end today. And then, Edelgard raised her axe, and spoke softly. Sorry, Dimitri. He froze. What dash? He turned, and she hurled her axe at the same time, the hero's relic rocketing towards Ria. She barely dodged the worst of it, the weapon tearing a long, harsh line of blood down her shoulder. The cathedral was quiet for a long moment before there was any reaction. Lady Ria's eyes went wide, flashing green. You, contemptuous blasphemer. I gave you your peace gracefully, allowed you to live despite your crimes, and this is the course you choose to take. Even knowing the danger this man, no, those people pose, you choose the path of bloodshed? I should have killed you far earlier. I can accept no world with your brand of evil in it. I'll end your life quickly, if it's any consolation. Dimitri's mouth was hanging low, having long since started to gape at the sheer madness of the situation. Edelgard. She gave him a short, sad look. Just don't get in my way, Dimitri. Then, without waiting for him to respond, she burst forward, freeing her axe from the pillar it had implanted into, and she began her assault on Lady Rhea, her axe smashing into Rhea's sword with abandon. The wound in Rhea's shoulder was healing, albeit slowly, and Dimitri felt caught in the middle of a crossroads. Thales let out a low, rumbling laugh. So, you remain true to your ideals until the end, sad little puppet. You have always remained our most exquisite creation. Go, now, rebel against your god and fulfill the glory of Agartha, just as you were created to do. Desperately, he glanced between Lady Rhea and Thales. He could only face one. If he faced Thales, would he even win? But if he didn't help Lady Rhea, then Edelgard would just kill her. But then Thales would get away, and his father, stepmother, Glenn, they wouldn't allow that. Their voices roared in his ears, already drowning out any thoughts that rumbled in his head. An arrow whistling past him made his decision for him. Thales grunted as he dodged the arrow, and he set his sights on Claude. Persistent little pest. I should have known an Almiran dog would bite. Almiran? Claude is. Ah, well, you know what they say about old dogs and whatnot. If we've only got one trick, might as well use it and abuse it. Claude laughed merrily as he took another shot, the wind ensconcing the arrows. With a short sound, Thales teleported, avoiding the hailstorm, and his palm was out to cast magic on Claude. But, this time, Dimitri was faster. He jumped up, slashing out towards Thales. The Agarthan barely had the sense of mind to warp, but after replaying their fight countless times in his head and seeing Epimenides' battle against Byleth, he was prepared. With a mid-air twist, he hurled Eridbar down, the lance cutting through part of Thales' arm. He landed as Thales warped again, and Claude whistled. Nice moves, Dimitri, but are you sure you don't want to help Lady Rhea? I have to silence them, Dimitri responded naturally. A dash. Glenn, father, stepmother, I'll kill him. I'll kill him, avenge you all, bury his corpse under a mountain of others, and then I'll be free. I'll have done it. My work will be done. Just wait, the rats will be hunted soon. He had never felt quite so tranquil before. His mind was crystal clear. His family, Glenn, they were all silent. The voices of those who had been gone for so long were clearly, blissfully, quiet. He picked up Eridbar again, and with a smile, he launched himself towards Thales. Claude scratched his head, confused. He kinda wasn't really sure what to do in a situation like this. See, Thales needed to be killed, that was for sure, but Dimitri was also going on an absolute mental spiral right now, and he kinda felt like he could literally stab the man in the back and he wouldn't notice. With that being said, Edelgard was having an equally good time beating away at Rhea's defenses. The woman was barely able to defend herself, and he kinda, just a little bit, completely wanted her dead, so. Honestly, he felt kinda bad for both Rhea and Thales. They'd worn each other out, only to both be killed by some randoms who had next to nothing to do with whatever conflict they had. He could honestly take absolutely no action in this battle and he doubted the outcome would change. Biruyut, at the same time. Claude raised Failnaught, firing the bow at Thales. The Agarthan weaved through the shots, his sword darting out to strike at Dimitri. The King of Lions let out a sharp laugh as he reared his lance back. Eridbar, come. One more atrocity to the pile. Dimitri whirled, the lance striking against the ground, chaotic and malevolent energy darting towards Thales. Claude could barely believe the sheer strength of it. Thales brought his sword up, preparing to block. Unfortunately for him, that cursed lance wasn't something you could just go around blocking. The energy broke through his guard, sending Thales flying. With a loud groan, the Agarthan struggled to pull himself to his feet. Get up! Dimitri growled, readying his lance, stalking forward. He reached Thales' back, grabbing the man and bodily hurling him across the cathedral. Before Thales landed, however, he warped once more, and Claude tensed. The man had reappeared behind Dimitri. "I won't allow that," Claude called out, rearing his bow back. Arrows instantly whizzed through the battlefield as though they were fired by a wind god, forcing Thales to block once more. Dimitri instantly turned and swept outwards with his lance, but a barrier stopped him. "I won't be defeated by you beasts here," Thales grunted, teleporting once more. When he did so, he was floating in the air, a barrier separating him from the pair of them. All around them, dark magic seemed to flare to life, the malevolent energy filling the air. Countless sigils formed, all of them seeming to be filled with dark magic just as strong as, if not stronger than, any miasma he had ever seen. Hundreds of them littered the air. If he didn't dodge. "This is," Claude whispered. "Enough. Begone," Dimitri roared, racing towards Thales. Before he got there, however, that dark magic completed itself. Claude's wyvern backed up, barely staying out of the range of the attack. She flew about, dodging dark magic blast after blast. Down below, however, Dimitri, Edelgard, and Rhea weren't having a much better time. Dimitri was hacking and slashing his way through the attack without much grace. His wild abandon meant that he was taking way more hits than necessary, but that hungry look in his eyes probably meant that he didn't care. Edelgard, on the other hand, had simply decided to just take the entirety of the attack head-on, staring Thales dead in the eyes as the dark magic buffeted her. Rhea, on the other hand, had taken a more tactical approach. Her back was to a pillar in the cathedral, and she swatted down any stray dark magic that came her way, her sword and shield protecting her entirely. When the dust cleared and the magic stopped, all four of them remained standing, somehow. Thales was disbelieving as he stared at Edelgard. How did you dash?" "I came to a great many realizations when studying dark magic on my own. It's an innate talent of mine, growing on the battlefield, and it's what I'll use to take you down, Thales. Something specifically cultivated for you. Your magic is useless against me. As soon as Rhea is dead, your head will roll next," she announced, and with that, she hefted her axe once more, and her deadly dialogue with Rhea continued. Claude just shook his head. That woman grew more and more insane every time he looked at her. It was almost admirable. Their brief moment of respite ended. With a roar, Dimitri launched back into battle. Their melee was long, drawn out, and honestly, very confusing. Dimitri fought like a rabid dog against Thales, who used manipulating strategies and strategic warps to try to get Dimitri to fall for his tricks and land powerful blows. Even when he succeeded, however, most of the time Dimitri would just shrug off the hit anyways and continue to fight. On Edelgard's side of things, she was fighting like it would be her last fight in this world, flames cloaking her every action as she tried to separate Rhea's head from her shoulders. If he squinted, it almost looked like a bar brawl. Eventually, however, something had to change. Their enemies were too weakened, and all three lords had wills too strong to be beaten out easily. Thales was knocked back by Dimitri's overwhelming strength, sent sprawling against the central pedestal. He pulled himself to his feet slowly, raising his sword. "Mortal scum, I will not perish, not here. I refuse. I absolutely refuse to accept that outcome. Agartha will see the light once more." Thales spat, and an overwhelming dark magic energy enveloped him, starting to spread. "No." A voice rang out, and Claude watched with no small amount of surprise as Rhea darted toward Thales, striking down on the sphere of dark magic before it fully erupted. Under her sword, it practically convulsed, begging to be let loose, but she wouldn't allow it. Both of them let out loud noises of exertion, and there was a large flash of light. Claude shielded his eyes, and when the light faded, so too had their adversaries. "They're gone," he said, his voice quiet. The cathedral was quiet for a long moment. And then, Dimitri cast his eye to Edelgard, his entire being radiating pure malevolence. "I couldn't kill him. He got away. He fled, with his tail between his legs." Grimly, Edelgard raised her axe. "Once more, I have failed them. Once more, I am a useless son. A useless king, who can do nothing more than disappoint the only people who have ever loved him. Dmitri wiped his mouth, and he brandished Eridbar. So, you're set in this, Dmitri? Claude asked, resigned. He knew that Dmitri planned on fighting Edelgard if things went poorly here. He just had no idea that things would go this poorly. Set? I have never been more certain in my entire life, Claude. Stay out of my way if you know what's good for you. You have not proven yourself a traitorous rat who would dare crumple up the last vestiges of trust I've granted to you. Edelgard closed her eyes. I will not apologize for what I've done. I understood what I was doing, and after weighing out the pros and cons, I made my decision. If the consequences are a final bout with you, then I will be happy to oblige. Claude just let out a defeated sigh. I shouldn't known it could have ended like this. You two have been at each other's throats since day one. I had hoped you two could come to an easier resolution than this, but I'm gonna drop that hope for now. Dmitri, Edelgard, you two have fun. I'm just gonna keep my nose out of this. I can't dissuade either of you, and I'm not even gonna bother trying. When the dust settles and you two are done, I'll come peel one of your bodies off the cold, hard floor, okay? Okay. And as he guided his wyvern out of the cathedral, he heard the first slam of a weapon striking another. Pulling out a small flask from his belt, he sat down in front of the doors to the cathedral. His wyvern let out a low warbling sound. Slowly, he petted her neck. Yeah. I know. I just have to hope he knows what he's doing. I can't ask you to understand. Our viewpoints are simply too different, Dmitri. Edelgard grit her teeth, trying to hold back against that overwhelming strength of his. Lightning crackled over their weapons, jumping to her hand. Blocking, it seems, was not a viable answer to his attacks. I wouldn't want to understand a monster like you anyways, he snarled, Eridbar striking out and clashing against her shield and aim multiple times. He reeled back, striking out, and erupting the earth towards her. She cut through it easily. Rather hypocritical, wouldn't you say? She taunted, swirling her axe to create a cyclone of flames. Dmitri didn't bother trying to go around her attack, instead choosing to slash outwards in a counterspin to the tornado, his electricity crackling and dispelling the effect of her fire. I'm more than aware of my nature, Edelgard. I am nothing more than a husk of a man hiding a blood-craven beast beneath. But you are worse. Your visage, disgusting as it is, doesn't even bother to hide the demon you truly are. You've tried to tempt countless to your side, whispering honeyed words in their ears, forcing them to bow, to give you their twisted loyalty. You've torn apart this land and its people, and you have done so with a smile on your face. No, for a beast like you, there is no such thing as a happy ending. That is something that I am already well aware of. I did not choose my course lightly. I am fully aware of the ramifications, of the loss, of the pain that I would inflict. If killing 1,000 today will save 10,000 tomorrow, then I will remove those heads with my bare hands if I must. Dmitri raised Eridbar, a harsh rasp in his voice. And today, I'll remove yours. He reared back, infernal energy building in his body. She whipped aim upwards, slicing towards him. Their weapons met, and despite the advantage she held, Dmitri overwhelmed her with sheer force. Her hero's relic was cast aside, and she grit her teeth, barely raising her shield in time to block. The aftershocks of Eridbar weren't something to underestimate. It was as though she had barely blocked the blow at all. Dmitri continued his assault, fighting forwards like a deranged madman, carving scars into the floor of the cathedral. Her back hit a pillar, and Eridbar raced for her neck. She crouched, barely avoiding the strike. The lance sunk deep into the pillar, and Edelgard charged forwards, slamming into Dmitri's middle and carrying him away from the weapon. With a final push and a burst of flame, the King of Lions was sent tumbling away, recovering quickly. He looked feral as he recovered, and lightning danced across his form. He charged forwards, one hand outstretched, and she came to the very sudden realization that he absolutely intended to fight her barehanded. Dmitri, stop being a fool. There's so much that you don't know about Rhea, things that would have swayed your course had you known them. I don't want to fight you, but if you continue this course, then I will cut you down. Dmitri laughed, lunging forward with a strong punch. She dodged, and he brought it to the floor. It impacted into the ground, sending a spider web of cracks across the flooring, with the material being turned to fine dust under his hands. She was almost horrified at how absurdly strong he was. "Silence that wretched tongue of yours before I rip it out of your head," Dmitri roared. "I will never be silent, not for you or anyone else. Rhea is a monster, Dmitri, a monster who has controlled Fodlan for the past 1,000 years. She's an immortal being that's held a stranglehold over everyone for the longest time, and she needs to be removed. She is the Immaculate One, Dmitri, and she is Saint Siros. The texts passed down through my family prove it. All you need to do is trust me." Dmitri punched out once more, and this time, she brought her shield up to block. His fist slammed into it, and she was pushed back by the sheer force. Regardless of her nature, regardless of her lies, regardless of who she is, I am not one to judge her. Can you see it, Edelgard? The madness that permeates my being? She and I are kindred spirits, and if I must spiral into the eternal flames for my sins, then so be it. Regardless of what future awaits her, there is none more craven than you, who would turn a blade on an ally in her time of need." Dmitri pulled Eridbar from the pillar, and Edelgard let out a soft sigh. "So, that's your conviction, then? It seems I can't convince you to stop." Dmitri laughed, the sound low and deranged. "Perhaps I could have been convinced. Perhaps if you had only chosen a brighter path forward, I would not be facing you now. But hypotheticals are of no use to me right now." Dmitri charged up, leaping forwards and spinning Eridbar in an electrically charged, suicidal sprint. Edelgard found herself on the back foot, Dmitri's forward momentum forcing her backwards far faster than what she could feasibly move at. His lance slammed into the ground, and an explosion of lightning coursed across her form. She let out a quiet groan of pain as the electricity coursed through her veins, only barely pushed aside by the flame that permeated her blood. She lashed out in retaliation, striking towards Dmitri before he could fully retaliate. Her axe flashed out, dragging it across the ground and leaving scores of burns in the floor of the cathedral floor. Time and time again, aim raked across Dmitri's form, barely blocked or dodged. Finally, she exhaled and raised her axe, forcing as much power through her veins as possible. An explosion of fire erupted from the center, right on Dmitri. He let out an unholy cry, the energy enveloping him instantly. Grimly, she watched her handiwork, letting out a small sigh. Dmitri, he had been a victim of the tragedy, and he had spoken of the burns on his hands. If this failed, then it would likely. From the center of her attack, Dmitri let out a loud roar, and Eridbar cut straight through her infernal cyclone, dispersing it in an instant. Edelgard let out a sigh and picked up her shield. If it failed, then it would likely only incense him more, and that thought seemed to be correct. His eyes practically seemed to be smoldering. His lance flashed out, striking towards her countless times, strikes that he seemed all too content to allow her to block. Then, he jumped high into the air. "Don't struggle!" he bellowed, tossing Eridbar below. The lance erupted into a field of electric energy, and it washed over her body. The pain was growing greater with each hit she took, she noticed. It was enough to send her skidding back, panting and gasping for breath. "Have you had enough now, Dmitri?" she asked. "You will burn until we meet again, Edelgard. This, I swear." He picked up Eridbar, and the battle was on once more. His strikes were only growing with fury. Sweat rolled down his face and hers from the dramatic heat that she was producing, the air within the cathedral not moving nearly fast enough to keep up with the pace of their bout. She had no doubt that she would have electric scars on her body after this bout, just one more imperfection to add to the pile. It would be a good trophy for after she killed the king of Faerghus. Dmitri reared his lance back, this time catching her off guard as he spun and pulled her into the air. Before she could strike him, he brought them crashing downwards, the strike completely knocking the wind out of her and slamming a stray rock into her back. She groaned as Dmitri reared back, leaping into the air and tossing Eridbar towards her. She barely managed to roll out of the way of the throw, buying her barely enough time to raise her shield to defend against the follow-up. Time and time again, Dmitri slammed his lance into her shield, moving far quicker than she could hope to counter-attack against. He disengaged, leaping into the air. With a loud cry, He slammed downwards, twirling his lance and striking her shield with an incredible force. Except, this time, the shield crumbled and broke under his weight. She was sent flying backwards, Eredbar drawing a harsh line of red across her chest. She panted heavily as she recovered, raising her axe. Her strength was nothing to scoff at. She could hold her own if she merely went on the offensive. Eimr, let's end this. Raging storm. Eredbar, one final atrocity. Their two combat arts met and collided, unholy energy meeting cleansing fire, and there was an explosion of power between them. Edelgard cried out from the backlash of energy, covering her face from the blast back of stone firing back at her. When the dust settled, the devastation was imminently obvious. Long, charred scars littered the ground, the cathedral a total wreck. Miraculously, the only thing that remained standing was the statue of the goddess. All else had fallen to disrepair and ruin. Dimitri glared at her, and without saying anything else, he leapt at her, eager to continue. Somewhere deep inside of her, she was aware that this would be their last clash. Eredbar met Eimr once, then twice, Dimitri fighting like a crazed madman. He leaned away from her retaliatory strike, and as Eimr swung wide, she grit her teeth. Eredbar caught the edge of Eimr, and with a harsh kick to the middle, she was cast to the floor, her relic out of her hands. She panted heavily, staring up at Dimitri, who stood over her, his face leery and impassive. He reared back Eredbar, and it raced towards her head. She had only one option left. Only one hidden card, only one final weapon. She reached into her cloak, firmly grasped that dagger that had stuck with her and given her hope on the darkest nights, and she threw it. Metal met flesh, and the cathedral was silent for a long, long moment. It truly was a wonderful final dance, El. Chapter 15, Scarlet Blaze, the Oath of the Dagger. It truly was a wonderful final dance, El. Edelgard's breath caught in her throat. Eredbar stuck out of the stone, barely half a foot from her head. Her dagger had sunk into Dimitri's breastplate, right into his heart, and blood began to trickle slowly from the wound. What did you just call me? El, that was a name reserved only for the closest of family, for people who no longer existed in this world. It wasn't meant to come out of his mouth. He was certainly never meant to know it at all. Dimitri's hand left Eredbar, and he let out a shuddering sigh. He collapsed to one knee, barely keeping himself upright. I was worried that you remembered. It seems that you forgot after all. Thank you, El. Hearing that name again jarred her out of whatever funk she had fallen into. Dimitri had spared her, had held her life in his hands and actively chosen to let go of it. That tint of madness that had clung to his form was long gone. His face was written with an incomparable solemnity. What are you? And then, a small memory. Something hidden, something almost meaningless, something that honestly shouldn't have meant anything. A flicker of something, of a boy with hair like sunlight, holding her hands in the cold air. And yet, that small memory was all the trigger she needed to remember more. Hearing that name, that inflection, it opened a dam in her mind, a creek turning into an ocean in an instant. Bright sunlight, cheerful laughing, golden hair, blue eyes, a kind smile, L.D. The word slipped from her lips almost involuntarily. Dimitri smiled bitterly, and his other leg failed him. He began to keel over, and Edelgard scrambled upwards, sheer panic filling her. She barely caught him, kept his head from hitting the ground, as the memories kept pouring in. Follow my lead, D. Oh, okay. 1, 2, 3, 4. Her breath was rattled as she spoke. Why you, it was you back then. That noble who I spent my days with, you were the one who gave me that dagger. That dagger, which was now embedded in his chest. He let out a shuddering laugh. So it was. Do you remember the oath we made? That you would always cut a path to your future. Frustration began to fill her core. Wait, you can't dash. Dimitri's voice was raspy as he spoke. The path to that future, it would only lay through me. You could never reach that future if I still draw breath. I am sorry that I put up an act to force you to fight me, but we can heal you. I can Claude. Claude, get a healer. Claude dash. His hand grasped hers, and furious tears brimmed in her eyes as she turned her head to him. "It's all right, El. I knew this would happen." Everything. Dmitri was suddenly racked with coughs, his grip going slack in her hand. His eyes still held light, if only barely. "Don't speak. We're going to get a healer. You will survive this day, Dmitri Alexander Bladdid, so help me dash. It's strange. All I wished for was death, and yet, it feels so empty." Her desperation flared up. "Claude, hurry!" she roared. There were still no sounds of movement from the doors of the cathedral. No sound of a wyvern taking off, no sounds of rushing, nothing. "El, I can't see. Are you still there?" She dropped her gaze back down to Dmitri, clenching his hand tightly. In her heart, she knew that it was too late. He would die. She had buried the dagger, the proof of their connection, in his heart herself. Still, she desperately wished, desperately hoped, that someone would burst through the doors, that someone would rectify this one final mistake she had made. Her dearest, long-forgotten friend. "I'm here, Dmitri. Don't worry. I'll stay until the end." Dmitri let out a resigned sound, his complexion far too pallid. His eyes stared at nothing, at a point far beyond something she could see. She hoped that the goddess would welcome him with open arms. She would burn down that salvation of hers personally if she didn't. "El," he rasped, his head lolling to the side, "please, forgive me. Forgive them. Don't hate them. The church, don't hate." Dmitri's voice went quiet, then it finally petered out. His eyes shut, and then didn't open again. His breath stopped, and his hand went completely slack in hers. That slow, rhythmic pulse in her hands went completely dead. Tears welled up in her eyes, and she rested her head on his chest. "Why? There was no need. We could have, she hiccuped, knowing full well that he couldn't hear her, would never be able to respond to her again. Dmitri's body shook as she sobbed into his chest. The last remnant of her happiness from her youth, the one driving force that had kept her going in the darkest nights, had been snuffed out. She had raised her blade and extinguished that flame personally, all because of her ambitions. She had lost. Lost so much, lost time and time again, and this time, there was no one to blame but herself. Had she not raised that blade to Rhea, not ruined that fragile peace they held? Grief lashed her heart, and there was nobody at her side to hold her and tell her that everything would be all right. Those people had all left her side long ago. Her hands touched the dagger in his chest, hesitating, wondering if she even deserved to pull it out. She had cut her path to the future, and it ended up in one more corpse of someone she cared for. It was strange, wasn't it? Not 5 minutes ago, she could almost say she loathed him. Had hated his ideals, how he lacked the conviction to enact true change, how he would never be the capable leader that Fodlan needed. Now that fragments of her memory were returning, the last thing she could say was that she hated him. He had stood in her way countless times, tried to aim for diplomacy, stuck to his ideals to the end. Perhaps he was someone to respect, even to the her of yesterday. Why had she despised him so? Was it because of Arian Rod, or was it because he was a roadblock in her way? When things were like this, she felt oddly disconnected from it all. Disconnected from the war, from her decisions, from the striking loss that had just hit her. From the last vestige of her past, cast aside once more. There was nothing but the future awaiting her now, wasn't there? There was no peace to be had from her memories. A hand touched her shoulder, and she barely reacted. "Come on, Edelgard. It's time to go." Claude's voice was quiet. I can't. I know. It's okay. Come on, we won. It's time to get going. They won. It felt so hollow. Gently, Edelgard allowed herself to be pulled away from Dmitri's still body, dragging herself to her feet. She stumbled over to Amber, the axe hanging loosely in her hands. It dragged behind her as she slowly began to walk. She turned her head to Claude, who was still crouching by Dmitri's body. "Aren't you coming?" She sounded so tired. "I said that I would peel one of your bodies off of the cold, hard floor, didn't I? I don't want you to have to handle this. Go on, go." I'll get the body ready and tell Faergus the bad news. You just go find some lodging. The body. He spoke of it so clinically. It almost made her want to vomit. She turned her head and slowly began to walk. She didn't know how, but she ended up in the Archbishop's chambers on the 3rd floor. She had never felt this exhausted in a long, long time. Grief was something she was used to, something she had constantly endured day after day. Perhaps it was because she had grown comfortable, confident in her plans, that this had occurred. She had believed herself above reproach, believed that her ideals were all the justification she needed to keep going, regardless of the consequences. Time and time again, she had worried for her friends' lives. And yet, every single time, they had turned out okay. Everything had turned out okay. She had dared to believe that things would end without tragedy, that peace could be established without loss. What a fool she was. There was a soft knocking noise at the door, and Hubert's impossibly kind tone rang through. My lady, Monica, and myself are beginning our research to access Zaras. If you have need of me, you need only call. She didn't respond. Couldn't muster the energy to. Eventually, she would need to rise, would need to open her eyes and face the world. She would need to face the world, would have to stop sequestering herself away and hiding from her responsibilities, from her consequences. But that time was not now. The memories just kept flowing in, memories of their time together, of the tender moments they held together as children. The hope that Dagger gave her when she lost so much was indescribable. She should have been kinder to him. If she only had remembered. The sun fell before there was a knock on her door again. Hey, Edelgard, it's me, Claude. Can I come in? Slowly, she sat up in bed. Ria's bed was truly too luxurious for her. No. I figured as much. Take your time. Dimitri told me of the connection between you two. There are some people from Faergus here who want to talk to you. Seath, too. It's important. I can wave them away for a few days at most, okay? Come find me when you're ready. Oh, and, I hope you don't mind, but I covered up what you did. The way the story goes, Thales had some mind control Agartha and Mumbo Jumbo over you, and you attacked Ria. Dimitri had to fight to snap you out of it, and he only succeeded after you wounded him. Got it. The words felt hollow to her ears. No, there should be no avoiding this. She felt as though she was due her punishment, as though this grief she felt was far from enough punishment for her deeds. Perhaps she would have to face the wrath of all of Faergus for killing their king. All right, well, I'm just gonna take your silence as a yes. Remember, come find me when you're ready to talk. Claude left, his footsteps heavy in the silence, and she was left alone with her thoughts once more. She curled up under the blankets, staring into nothingness. How long would she endure the grief of the past? She could not even close her eyes to sleep, lest his gnashing voice reach her ears, his words biting as he spoke of ripping her head from her shoulders. His words, as she clutched him in his last breaths, reassured her that it was only an act, that he meant none of what he said, and yet. She was roused from fitful sleep by another knock on the door. My lady, I come bearing news. I request permission to enter. Hubert's voice was filled with trepidation, his voice lined with an emotion that she couldn't place. She let out a long sigh, that ghost of grief that clouded her mind being chased away for a moment. I wish to be left alone for now, Hubert. I will return soon. My lady, I must insist. She paused. Hubert would almost always respect her right to her own privacy. The instances of him insisting his will over hers were rare. She stood up slowly, and opened the door for him. His mouth was pressed in a thin line, and an envelope hung in his hands. Come in, Hubert. She sighed. She was in no state of dress to be taking any serious visitors, practically the only thing that hung from her frame was a nightgown. Hubert had seen her at her worst, however he was the only one she could trust with this level of vulnerability. Hubert bowed shortly, allowing himself in. He stood in the center of the quarters, staring at her uncertainly. Lady Edelgard, I was given this letter earlier today. Its contents will be of great importance to you, I assure you. In addition, shortly before I was given this, I completed my research into Lady Anselma. A headache formed. What does my mother have to do with this? Hubert smiled grimly. Everything, as you will come to find out. He extended the envelope to her, and she cautiously took it. The seal was already broken. Hubert always scanned her letters first. That was nothing new to her. The fact that he brought it to her specifically spoke volumes about its contents. Exhausted, she sat down on the edge of the bed, and flicked open the letter. From the very first line, her stomach dropped. L. I am sorry that I cannot tell you the words I need to say directly. Indeed, it feels somewhat cowardly to conclude things in this manner, and yet, I fear there is no other way for me to do so. I am writing this letter the night before our siege on Garreg Mach. I hope you can forgive me for my actions tomorrow. I do not wish to place the burden of my life on your shoulders, but I truly do not believe that I can continue living in this world. I wish for revenge, but that wish has driven me for too long. The cries of the dead in my ears have grown too loud to ignore as of late, the idea of rest too tempting. I am sorry for my selfishness. Had I been a better man, a less selfish man, I would aim for a peaceful resolution, one where neither of us had to fight, where we could both reach peace and happiness together, where we could reach out to each other and have our hands accepted. I have been told that I always aim for the best possible outcome. I have also been told that you would spit in my face for that belief. Is it wrong to believe that both assumptions are incorrect? I've never wished for anything more than I wish for death, and you would gladly let me roll over and die for you. I suppose that is a somewhat stupid question, in the end, now that I think about it. I fear that I'm rambling. I only have so much time, so forgive me, I won't be able to erase my words, for lack of paper and ink. I would hope that you do not think so lowly of me. I have not chosen this path lightly. That future you chose to fight for, it's something I feel I can believe in. There's a hope that it is a just future, somewhere deep within me. Your actions, and the blood that you've spilled, is something revolting to me, and yet, to me, you're still someone I love. It is rather contradictory, is it not? I do not want to hate you, far from it. And yet, you've changed so much. I want you to accomplish all you aim to, because it's something I believe that everyone deserves, but that future of yours is removed from the will of the weak. There are people who need the goddess, who need their faith, and your future discards them entirely. And yet, I can't help but have hope in your future. I cannot bring myself to stand directly in your way, Edelgard. Not now. Not when we have spoken as we have, not when we have spent time together, not when I granted you reprieve in Fhirdiad. Not when your every action reminds me of the time we spent together as children. I was hoping that my words would reach you, but if they don't, then I can only hope that my actions will. There is something that you, and very many others, are unaware of. Do you remember when I asked you if you remembered Lady Anselma, your mother? That wasn't for no reason. Shortly after Cornelia cured the plague that ravaged Faergus and almost decimated the royal family, she had a single request for us to take in Lady Anselma. My father agreed, and when they met, it was love at first sight. They married in secret, and Lady Anselma changed her name to Lady Patricia. In short, we are step-siblings, L. With my passing, there is no one to take the throne in Faergus. Should there be no immediate successor of the Bladdid line, which I am certain there are none that can be proven, then the throne will go to either immediate connected family or to Felix. You are the only one who remains in my family. I want you to cut a path to your future, L. I have already made arrangements for you to seamlessly take the throne. Should you wish it, you can make a path to the future that does not require the blood of Faergus. But, please, remember that the Church is not your direct enemy. Their issues and their systems, I cannot fault you for taking up arms against, but please do not persecute others for their faith. Many people need that faith, and it isn't something that ought to be stripped from them just because of the actions of the few. Please, do not try to take it from them. Their anger will boil to vengeance, and that vengeance will aim to separate your head from your shoulders at all costs. Oh, and on another note, please make sure that you eat plenty. Felix often asks me to train with him. It is an exhausting prospect every time. Sylvain and Ingrid have been joined at the hip lately. I'm beginning to suspect there's more going on that meets the eye. Oh, and please allow Annette and Mercedes space in Bear or Ferdiad to open a shop, if they wish. I've heard them speaking of it often. Even if it does not come to pass, I am sure that the gesture would be kind. Ash is a wonderful man and a loyal knight, but he will likely be hurt and confused at my passing. As for Didu, he is an excellent man and my most loyal retainer. His land, and his culture, has been eroded by the Agarthans, and by the rage of my people. Please, do your best to see it restored. And, do not feel hurt by the actions of my friends when they learn of my passing. Weather their rage, and all of you will come out on the other side having grown. There are others, so many others I wish to speak of, but my time runs short and my space shorter. No matter what, do not forget that I love you. You are my one and only beloved sister, the last of my family in this world. Do not blame yourself for my choices. Live your life free, and soar as high and far as an eagle. The King of Lions. Dmitri Alexander Bladdid. She didn't even realize that tears were rolling down her face until one splotched on the paper. She let it hang in her hands, feeling empty at the words. Hubert spoke, quietly. All hail the new Queen of Faerghus. Edelgard's voice was choked as she spoke. He was my brother. All this time, he was my brother, and he knew, and he just never told me. Dmitri was a very loyal man, but he was also very reserved. I would not put it past him to believe that you not knowing would be better for the both of you. She clutched the paper loosely in her hands. I killed my last brother with my own hands. Hubert knelt in front of her. Lady Edelgard, if I may, I would take his words to heart. Edelgard regarded Hubert, blinking slowly. He continued. Dmitri wanted you to move forward with your dream. His death was of his own choosing. You should not let it go to waste. He gave you all the tools you needed to succeed. She let out a small, humorless chuckle. That he had. He'd given her all the leverage she could possibly ask for against the church. He'd given his life so that she could have instant access to Faerghus' royal family. If she wished, she could cast them out at this very moment. But doing so, with the last will he had given her. What Dmitri wanted her to do was unite Fodlan. He wanted her to succeed, to build a path to a brighter future for all of them, and he gave her the most bloodless method possible. Now, there was no need to fight to take Faerghus. It had unceremoniously fallen into her hands. As a connecting member between the Hresvelg and Bladdid lines, both of which had close interactions with Saint Cyros, her words suddenly gained far more weight against the church as well. Now she had a new leg to stand on, something Dmitri had undoubtedly considered. She drew in a shuddering breath, forcing a fresh wave of tears back. Hubert, call for Claude. Claude didn't bother trying to be sympathetic this time. He just opened the door, waltzed in, and sat down. Edelgard sighed as his behavior before he started to speak. Hey, princess. Or, should I call you queen now? I see that word has traveled fast. Nah, just to me, the Blue Lions, and the church for now. Dmitri, I was the only one he told his grand plan to, outside of making a few plans for if he lost his life early. Well, earlier than he planned, that is. Edelgard drew in a shuddering breath. And, tell me what his plan was, exactly. Claude reclined in his seat, a flat expression on his face. Well, you've seen it yourself. Worked exquisitely, if you ask me. What else is there to know? She opened her eyes, staring at him with as much malice as she could muster. Dmitri, my brother wouldn't have come to you if there was nothing you could offer him. Claude stared at her for a long few seconds before sighing. You know, you're a bit too inquisitive for your own good. Knowing this will probably only hurt you, you know. I'll be the judge of that. I want to know everything. Start from the beginning. All right, just don't say I didn't warn you. Where to begin? Well, how about we just start from when he actually told me the plan. It was before Rhea even left for Gareg Mach. He came to me because he trusted me. Told me about all this baggage between you and him, how you were his stepsister, how you met as children. I was a bit surprised, honestly, mainly because I kinda thought he had a thing for you. Guess it wasn't exactly puppy love, eh? Claude smiled. Edelgard didn't respond, simply staring at him flatly. All right, Got it, I'll be serious. Anyways, he was pretty specific in his plans. He told me that he was going to get you to kill him at Garreg Mach, and that he wanted my help to make it possible. Hearing the words coming from Claude's mouth only solidified the headache forming in her head. Then why didn't you help me in the fight? Claude slowly reached into his clothes, and he set a small vial, filled with a sort of dust, on the table. Edelgard stared at it hollowly. Dimitri asked me to make that for him. A slow-acting poison. He wanted to be sure that he wouldn't survive. Said he couldn't leave anything up to chance, and that I was the only person he trusted to make it work. Her mouth was dry. And you just made it for him? Without question. Claude let out a short chuckle. Edelgard, he didn't exactly give me a choice. He made his stance very clear. It was either I did this for him, or he took more drastic measures. Then, let me tell you what he said, verbatim, if you don't make this poison for me, then I will be forced to impale myself on my own lance. Can you imagine how I felt when I heard that? Dimitri was my friend as much as he was your brother, once upon a time. I figured you didn't want to see him commit ritual suicide, so I brewed him up something strong, mashed it into an edible ball, and handed it to him. She just felt empty. Dimitri had gone that far? He'd enlisted Claude that long ago? And the man had said nothing? Claude twirled an arrow in his hands, looking disinterested if not for the tightening around his eyes and the edge to his voice. You remember when he wiped his mouth, right before you started fighting? That was when he swallowed it. He was dead even before your weapons first clashed. The more you fought, the faster the poison worked, and the only one with the antidote would have been me. Fresh tears burned in her eyes. Then, why didn't you dash? Edelgard, Claude interjected, I think you should talk to the kingdom commanders if you want to know the answer to that one. She unclenched her hands, the sheets jumbled beneath her. Was there ever anything I could have done to save him? I don't know. I'm not Dimitri, so I can't exactly tell you what he was thinking. If you had never declared war on Rhea, he may have lasted a few more years. Without someone exceptional, someone truly outstanding, though, I don't think he was ever coming back from the brink. He told her coldly. You can't know that. He would have dash. Edelgard, you know that mental spiral he went on during your fight? Only half of that was faked. He was someone who genuinely thought of himself as a monster, something no better than a demonic beast. I'm telling you, go talk to the people of Faerghus, and they'll give you their accounts on him. They're hurt, too. That's the only way for you to understand. She breathed in and out, slowly. It felt strange, to think that the world, that everyone else, was grieving along with her. Claude, I want to speak to the delegates from Faerghus. Not the commanders. Not yet. I'm not. Her conviction had never wavered like this before. She had faced countless impossible hurdles in the past, and yet when faced with the prospect of dealing with Dimitri's old classmates, her new subordinates, she found her will shaking. Before that, though, there's something we need to talk about in regards to the Federation. I'm sure you know that the Kingdom and Federation were in an alliance, right? Well, we built that alliance as a way to defy the Empire when they were on our doorsteps. With Dimitri dead and a new ruler in place, we're either going to have to write up new terms or dissolve the alliance entirely. Claude stared at her with a tight look drawn on his face. I'm not even queen yet. I don't think I have the right to decide something like that, Claude. Sure, you're not queen yet, but you're still the one who has to make all of the decisions in the future. For example, you could make Faerghus a vassal state to the Empire, you could absorb it into the Empire, you could toss out the Church, you could do anything you wanted, really. Your options are endless. The issue is that the kingdom you lead might not be the kingdom I made an alliance with, you know? And Faerghus is a really traditional place. Too much reform too quickly and you'll be the one in danger, or so Dimitri once told me. I don't want to make any moves until I know what your plans are. Edelgard gave a short sigh. My plans haven't changed. I still have to remove Rhea from power, and I still have to destroy the Agarthans. Until I can build a world where all people can be free from their oppressors, I can't. So you're not giving up on getting rid of Rhea, then? No. I can't. It can't go to waste. Claude stared at her with an oppressively calculating eye, his gaze seeming to dissect her down to the very soul. Well, good for you, because I want Rhea gone, too. You're lucky I'm not like Dimitri. If I were, I'd probably be really angry at you right now. I mean, he sacrificed himself so you could reach the future you want, right? But you're sticking with the same plans, even knowing his thoughts on the church. I'm honestly kind of shocked your resolve hasn't wavered at all. Works out well for me, at least. Here's to a long partnership, Edelgard. Long live the Queen of Faerghus. Claude's eyes were sinister as he gave her a broad smile, and she warily accepted his outstretched hand. With all that said and done, let me lead the way. There's a lot for you to be doing, Edelgard, and not a lot of time to do it. Let's go. Talking with the delegates from Faerghus had been exhausting. They had been advisors to the king, and as the newest known member of the Bladdid household, they had come to inform her of her role. Faerghus was in turmoil. It had already been in turmoil before, but Dimitri's presence had smoothed things over, the rights of succession guaranteed, their king in place. With Edelgard, a former enemy, taking the throne after his death, the people were understandably not happy. Several days had passed since Dimitri's passing, and word traveled fast. Lord Rodrigue and several other notable lords had taken preemptive action to control any potential riots. There were women coming out in droves claiming to have the bastard child of Rufus, the previous regent and Dimitri's uncle. None of their claims held any veracity. Her claim to the throne remained tight. For now, she was to stay her course. She couldn't take the throne so suddenly, and until the time was right, matters of state would be handled by Duke Frildarius Felix. After the funeral, once any remaining unrest had settled somewhat, she would ride for Fhirdiad and officially take control. Until then, however, since she was the sole surviving member of House Bladdid, she would gain full control of their assets and armies, and considering House Bladdid was the royal house, both of those were substantial. To put it another way, she now had full, unhindered access and control over the kingdom's coffers and the kingdom's army, within reason. Seath had also approached her and offered his condolences, stating that he too was aware of their connection. However, as the acting archbishop in Rhea's absence, he had taken a harsh stance against her almost from the outset. If she attempted to forcibly remove the church using the crown's influence, then they would fight back just as hard. It would be a Pyrrhic victory for her, in the end. Faerghus would collapse well before she succeeded, and she would be forced to dedicate far too many resources to maintaining the peace, and in the process, she would become the oppressor she sought to free all people from. She had merely felt tired when she told him that she had no intention of doing any of that for now. Rhea was her enemy. All she wanted was reform, and Rhea never would have allowed that. Already hadn't. Seath, if nothing else, had proven himself to be willing to listen. The day was done, however. Wearily, she entered her room, unclasping her armor. The sound of scraping metal came from right behind her, and her breath caught in her throat. She whirled on her attacker. Felix Hugo Frildarius stared at her, a sword pressed up to her neck. Give me one reason I shouldn't run you through right now. Panic flared within Edelgard. She hadn't prepared for this eventuality. She had expected the Blue Lions to take their anger out on her individually, but not for this to happen. Her lips parted, but nothing came forth. The sword tip pressed closer to her neck, and she backed her feet up, her legs banging against the side of the bed. Felix's eyebrows were drawn into a harsh rage. Talk. I'm not foolish enough to believe whatever drivel Claude spewed towards us. I've seen him scheme too many times to not recognize that look. I know what you did. Anyone could guess. Now, you can either spill your secrets now or share them with the eternal flames. The sword of Merilta was an executioner's sword, she noted hysterically. She opened her mouth, and the first words that came to mind were blurted out. I did what I had to do. For the future. That same excuse, the one she had thrown out time and time again, did not appease Felix. If anything, it only incensed him further. You and your damn future. Do you even understand what you've done? Do you even understand what we've lost? That crushing feeling you're feeling right now has been felt every day for the last 3 damn years because you couldn't give up on your war. Do you know how many nights I've had to watch fall, protecting their homeland? Protecting their people? It's sickening, hearing you blather on about that future when you know damn well it means nothing to me, or to anyone else out there. Our king is dead, and it's your fault. Felix snarled, the sword pressing right up to the edge of her neck. She forced herself not to swallow. I know. I know it's my fault. I will bear the blame for my actions. I can't ever hope to understand the impact that he had on you and your people, but don't bother. Save it. Those words are wasted on me. Ha, you know, I really thought the boar was recovering. He had finally gotten his act together, he was finally smiling, finally sharing his burdens, and then he went and got himself killed. If you don't tell me exactly what happened in that cathedral, then consequences be damned, I'll slit your throat and make a run for it, he threatened, and she could see in his eyes that he was entirely serious. Her words were small as she spoke. Rhea and Thales were weakened when we arrived in the cathedral. I chose to try and kill Rhea. Dimitri chose to fight Thales. Both of them got away. Then, Dimitri turned on me. We fought, he disarmed me, and I threw my dagger at him. He let it happen. He wanted to die, Felix, and I. Felix was quiet for a long moment, his sword unmoving as he scanned her eyes. TCH. Should have figured. The boar just looked happy because he could die. You have no clue, do you? You have no idea what Dimitri was like. What he did, what he meant for this nation. Slowly, she shook her head. I never tried to, because I never needed to, she quietly admitted. Finally, slowly, he lowered his sword. You have no idea how lucky you are. If your mother hadn't married King Lambert, you would have been dead. Skewered in the very monastery we fought so hard to retake. You never would have made it to this room in the first place. The only thing keeping you alive right now is the fact that Faerghus would crumble without a legitimate heir, and I can't take the throne without cries of dissent coming from all directions. He sheathed his sword, stalking away. I see, Edelgard responded, rattled. He turned to her one final time. Don't think I won't be telling the rest of the Blue Lions about this. They deserve to know what you did, and not all of them will be as forgiving as me. If you know what's good for you, lock your door and do it well, because Ash already bypassed the flimsy lock they had in place. The door slammed hard enough to rattle the entire room, and Edelgard flinched at the sound. Shakily, she sat down upon the bed. You cannot kill the leader of a nation without inviting the enmity of their people. Especially not one as beloved as Dimitri. She knew this. Facing the reality of her knowledge was something else entirely, though. She hadn't expected the pure malevolent rage that suffused Felix's eyes, how his piercing gaze seemed to cut right through her. The Blue Lions were his close friends. She should make an effort to apologize to each of them. She knew that she would likely never be able to receive their forgiveness, especially not when she aimed to unify Fodlan and would likely shatter their way of life along with it. The people who believed in the Central Church would surely react this way if Rhea was killed. Just how could she build peace on the back of such hate? Since when was everything so complicated? She wished to go back to those days where everything made sense, where her biggest worry was finding the easiest way to anger Dimitri and, to her point of view, dissuade him from attempting to propose marriage to her. He must have been so disappointed with her. She wasn't attacked in the night, she noted as she opened her eyes the next day. She hadn't bothered to lock the door. The previous lock had been far better than most she'd ever had, and yet Ash had picked his way through it with ease, according to Felix. Outside of outright barring her door, there was no way for her to prevent the Blue Lions from attacking her if they so wished, and knowing Didu's stature, there was no guarantee that would work, either. She rolled out of bed and got dressed slowly, methodically. There was serenity in the rhythm to her actions, in the dullness and mediocrity. Letting out a short sigh, Edelgard rose and left her room. There were many conversations to be had today. She found the first of the people she wished to talk to in the cathedral, where she was silently praying. Edelgard waited silently until she was finished. Only when she rose did she speak. Mercedes. Can I speak with you? The holy woman turned her set eyes to Edelgard. May I ask what about? Her words held a tinge of emotion to them, but she remained cordial. Edelgard inhaled through her teeth. I think, you probably already know. Mercedes was quiet for a long moment. Come, sit with me. We will be left alone here. There have been many people coming to pray in recent days. Privacy is granted to all. For the early morning, there certainly were quite a lot of people frequenting the trashed cathedral. Her words did not surprise Edelgard at all. She gave a shaky nod and settled upon the pew next to Mercedes. Her hands were clasped together for a long moment. Edelgard, have you prayed recently? I'm not one for faith. Mercedes smiled at her, her expression pained. You do not need to believe in the goddess to pray. I believe the mere act of prayer is enough to ease the burdens on anyone's soul. There is a reason that many have come here, after all. Their belief in the goddess has been rekindled, their holy site restored. Although it is in disrepair, there is beauty in the disrepair, don't you agree? The fact that the statue of the goddess remains standing is proof enough to them that their faith perseveres. Edelgard stared up, wondering if there truly was a goddess that could answer their prayers. It certainly had never answered hers. After a long moment, she let out a long sigh. Mercedes, I want to talk about Didash. Edelgard, Mercedes spoke, her words quiet and choked, I do not wish to talk about Dimitri. And that statement alone shut her mouth. She had never prayed before, not in earnest. Still, though, just once wouldn't hurt. If there's a goddess that can hear my prayers, then receive Dimitri with open arms. He did not deserve to have his life cut short, least of all by my hands. She unclasped her hands, lowering them back to her side. I'm sorry to intrude. Please enjoy the rest of your day. Mercedes gave no response as Edelgard slowly walked out of the cathedral, stepping onto the bridge to the monastery proper. She paused, staring out over the edge. They had calmly bantered on this bridge. It had seemed so normal, if only for a short breath of time. And then she had seen Rhea and Thales fight, and she intrinsically knew that there would be no better time to try and kill her, no time that did not lead to massive bloodshed, no time that didn't end with Edelgard fruitlessly crawling forward on the ground towards a future that would never come. Her empire would always be too weak to remove Rhea peacefully after the war. There was no scenario where she stayed aligned with the kingdom and also managed to fulfill her ideals. She stayed on the bridge for far longer than she intended, simply staring over the edge. Staring at the breadth of Fodlan developing beneath the monastery, feeling small and unnoticeable. Footsteps pulled her from her reverie, and she dragged herself away from the view, turning to greet the new arrival. Ingrid stared at her with a tightly drawn expression. The emotions that flitted across her face were ranging from anger to sadness, and Edelgard couldn't decide which one pained her more. Ingrid did not speak, instead choosing to walk forward slowly. Edelgard stiffened as she got closer, noting the relic on her back. Ingrid got within one step of Edelgard, then reared her fist back and punched her in the face. Edelgard fell to the ground, cradling her jaw, testing her teeth. None of them had been knocked loose, thankfully, but who was to say that this would be the only punch she took today? You're not my queen. You never will be, Ingrid said coldly, stalking past her towards the cathedral. Slowly, Edelgard picked herself up. Ingrid was already long gone. Crossing the bridge, she found herself in the reception hall. From across the hall, Sylvain rushed towards the bridge, pulling to a stop almost immediately after noticing her. His suave smile never faded. Hey, Edelgard. Fancy catching you here. Say, have you seen Ingrid? I think I made her met earlier, and dash. She's in the cathedral. Edelgard responded hollowly. Great, thanks. Sylvain said, his voice chipper and his face full with as much venom as could possibly be injected into a single look. He rushed past her, except his footsteps slowed and stopped after a moment. Hey, you know what, I have a great idea. How about the two of us go out and get a drink? It's on me, I swear. Sylvain asked, his voice almost hysterical as he turned towards her once more. Edelgard regarded him flatly. Sylvain dash. Actually, you know what, I changed my mind. I don't really think I can be around you right now without trying to kill you. Don't show your face around me again if you know what's good for you. Sylvain spat at her feet, and Edelgard watched, almost detached, as he turned and practically sprinted after Ingrid. The next person she ran into wasn't even a blue lion, it was Marianne, by the stables. "Oh, my. I'm glad to see you're out and about again, Edelgard. If you're looking for Claude, I think he left a little while ago on business." Marianne's voice was soft. "You are perhaps the only one happy to see me today, Marianne," she replied softly. Marianne was quiet for a moment before reaching out to her with a brush. "Do you want to brush Dort? It might make you feel better." The horse whinnied, as though feeling personally affronted by the idea. Edelgard accepted the brush anyways. As she groomed the horse, Marianne spoke. "I'm sure that you've already heard a lot of this from the others, but, do you want to talk about Dimitri?" She hummed quietly. "Did you get the chance to know him?" Marianne laughed softly. "For a short time, yes. We spoke. He was an interesting man. Out of all the people who I've spoken to, he was the only one who told me that I don't have to force myself to smile when I'm feeling sad." She didn't know much about Marianne, truthfully. Would now even be an appropriate time to ask? Would it even be beneficial? Before she could voice her ponderings, Marianne continued. "He told me that I shouldn't try to hide my true feelings, that I should let them show on my face. He said that I should never give up on myself, or my precious life." The brush creaked in her hands, but Edelgard refused to speak, refused to open her mouth and say the words that threatened to tumble out. "And yet, I know that his words were hollow." Finally, she paused, turning to regard Marianne fully. The other woman looked somewhat surprised at the direct scrutiny, and Edelgard's words were somewhat harsh as she spoke. "Explain what you mean." Marianne's expression melted into something that Edelgard couldn't identify. Pity? Gloating? She couldn't tell what it was, and that angered her. "I could tell that his words were hollow only in a certain sense. There was nothing he said to me that he did not mean. He was difficult to read, in that way. But, the things that he said sometimes did not apply to him. He would offer advice that he could never follow, and he would act in a way that he would hate to see others act. I can't call it hypocritical, but more self-destructive. Do you understand what I mean? So, that was simply Dimitri's nature, to sacrifice and believe himself lower than others. Did he even believe that his life was his own, in the end?" The brush fell from her hands. "Yes, I understand. Thank you for talking with me, Marianne. I should go." Marianne hummed. "I understand. Please be careful, Edelgard." She did not respond to the well wishes, instead slowly walking south. She had ended up in the marketplace. There was something she needed to get here. She stepped in front of the blacksmith, watching as the woman scurried about. Eventually, after a long moment, she stopped in front of her. "What can I do for ya?" she asked, sweat dripping down her brow. "I'm here to pick up a shield on commission from the strike force." The woman narrowed her eyes, staring at her. "You're Lady Edelgard, in Shaw?" Stiffly, she nodded. "Yes, that is correct." Clicking her tongue, the woman reached around the corner to grab a familiar shield. She slid it across to her. "Shame about what happened in the cathedral. We were getting real hopeful for a bit there, but you can't let your guard down around those damn slithery bastards. It ain't your fault that they lost King Dimitri, so don't get too worked up about it, yeah? Anyway, the shield should be good as new." Woodenly, she accepted the shield, slinging it across her back. The weight, which should have felt comforting, now only made her feel nauseous. She then came to a stark realization: if Claude had not fabricated that story for her, she absolutely would be receiving assassination attempts by now. The only reason that woman treated her kindly was because she believed that Edelgard had acted outside of her own control. Her shield would likely never get repaired by someone not affiliated with the strike force had that been the case. She could only imagine the treatment she would get in other areas. She made her way out of the marketplace, but not before being stopped by one more person. As she approached the gates, she locked eyes with Ash, who was carrying a basket in a sullen look. The man's eyes went wide, then narrow. The basket fell from his hands. His voice was trembling as he spoke. You know, I thought carefully about what I would say when I ran into you again. I rehearsed my lines carefully, and I spent all night thinking about what I could say that could hurt you the most. Staring at you, it doesn't even feel worth it. I just hope you're happy. Leave the rest of us alone to wallow in our misery. She couldn't even get a word in edgewise with him. He just scooped up his basket and brushed past her, his shoulder slamming into hers as he passed. She watched as he went and she grit her teeth, clenching her fists tightly. She didn't know. She couldn't have known. She had no idea that Dmitri meant this much, that his people cared for him like this, that her actions would have these consequences, that he was her brother and he loved her and she killed him. She turned and began to walk again, forcing back ridiculous tears. If she fell, would her people have this reaction? She had returned from the dead once. Her friends had cried and clung to her tightly when she returned to them. For an entire day after Monica had reunited with her, she had required Edelgard's presence close by or else she would start to burst into tears. If Dmitri had been forced to kill her, if he had taken her lands, would her people fight back just like this? Or would they rejoice, having finally been freed from her regime? From her war? She kept moving. The pier was quiet. 3 men sat at the edge, each holding tranquil and still fishing poles, and she could not bring herself to approach not when it was Rodrigue, Gustave, and Margrave Gautier, all 3 close friends to the previous king. She had taken their friend's son. No, she decided, approaching would not do her any good. She could not even begin to understand the grief they would hold, how vastly different it was from her own. She shook her head and entered the greenhouse. Within stood a single solitary figure, watering the plants, and this one was not a confrontation she could ignore. She approached slowly. Didu. The other man did not stir from his work. Your Majesty. You do not have to refer to me by that for now, Didu. I will not force loyalty upon you. His Highness wished for me to call you that, so that is what I will do. He responded neutrally. She let out a slow sigh. I see. Is there anything that you wish to say? Anything you wish to do? Didu paused, raising his watering can and setting it back down. There are many things I wish to say to you, and there are many ways that I wish to kill you. However, His Highness would not want that from me. I will follow his last wish until the grave, and his wish was for you to be happy. I will not ask you to smother your anger towards me. I understand, I am certain you have heard the truth of the matter. Say what you will, Didu. She responded instead, feeling defeated. Still, he resolutely shook his head, turning to face her fully. I do not think I can bring myself to harm you, in accordance with His Highness' wishes. However, I will never offer you my loyalty like I did His Highness. Dmitri was someone who I vowed to give my life for if it would further his goals, and yet at every opportunity, he refused me. Instead of treating me as a servant, as the vassal I was, he treated me as his closest friend. For seemingly no reason at all, he learned the language of Duskur, of our customs, of our culture and our beliefs. His presence was the binding force that drew together the nations of Duskur and Faerghus. It was only through him that we managed to reach peace. Without him, I fear that we will fall to strife once more. Edelgard held her head up high. Dmitri wanted me to try to reinstate your nation. Your culture. I will do my best to ensure that comes to pass. That will be impossible for you. You speak as though it is a certainty. She responded, feeling somewhat surprised. His casual dismissal of her wasn't something she expected. I speak from experience. You have already experienced such a conundrum before, and you have failed to rise to the occasion. There is no reason to believe that you will attempt to do so this time. Are you talking about Petra? I will admit, my handling of her situation could have been better, but I can't see how it would imply a total failure like you suggest. The dots began to connect in Edelgard's mind. That is because she has refrained from complaining to you, out of respect. She informed me that she had no formal teacher for much of her time in Fodlan, and that she was mostly self-taught. It is the reason for her choppy language, for her failings in communication. The difference between you and His Highness is that, when I was thrust into the same situation as Petra, he helped me every step of the way. Day in and day out, he aided me, giving me his tutelage and ensuring that I could survive the difference in culture, the difference in language. I held no importance, even to Duskur, while Petra is a queen of her nation. If you did not bother to learn her culture and her language, then you certainly will not bother to learn that of Duskur's, and if you do, it will be a disservice to Petra. She almost physically recoiled from his assessment. So you are just going to reject my help? I want to make things better, to bring about a future where those differences can be easily gapped. Yes, I will reject your help. As I have said, you are different from His Highness. Do not expect me to give you any sympathy for your new role. If you wish to make the change you speak of, you must endure the growing pains. If you are not fit for dreams as lofty as yours, then there is no point in attempting to fulfill them. She swallowed heavily. Then I suppose there's little else for the two of us to discuss for now. No. Good day, Your Majesty. Please leave. Didu picked his watering can back up, and Edelgard departed from the greenhouse with a miasmic air of dread hanging around her. Had she made the wrong decision after all? Were her convictions correct? Could she continue down this path? Should she even take the role of Queen of Faerghus? Could she even get away with refusing it? As she passed by the dormitories, a girl's voice called out to her. Hey, Edelgard. She turned to look at the final blue lion, regarding her wearily. Hello, Annette. Are you, busy? I figured we should talk, she asked, looking sheepish. Very well. It was only one final conversation. She accepted Annette's request, and the girl brought her back to her old room. The dormitory was obnoxiously clean and organized, and Edelgard noted the magical textbooks that lined the walls. The others have probably already given you the dressing down, huh? Annette asked quietly. Edelgard took a seat next to her on the bed. Indeed. Annette chuckled mirthlessly. Well, I can't say I blame them. Dimitri was our king, and he was our closest friend, too. You don't just lead an army for 3 years and not develop bonds with them. Annette, do you hate me for what I did? She decided to just cut to the heart of the matter. She laughed. Huh? What kind of question is that? Maybe some part of me does. I don't know. I'm definitely mad, though. I mean, I'm not gonna hit you or anything, but yeah, I'm mad. It would be weirder if I wasn't, right? Right. Edelgard responded. But, at the same time, Dimitri wanted you to be queen. You were his family, after all, and no matter what you did, he always defended you. I think he knew what you had done the entire time, and could never decide if he wanted to kill you or whisk you away somewhere safe. Fhirdiad, she spoke quietly. Annette nodded. Yeah, he brought you to Fhirdiad because he cared about you. You were his sister, you know? He cried the night he killed his uncle, for crying out loud, and that guy was as scummy as they got. I don't think he would have made it if he killed you when he got the chance. Felix, that bully, he wanted to do it, but Dimitri kept holding him back, she complained. Bully? Edelgard asked quietly. He keeps on asking me to sing him songs, even when he knows that they're not done. He'll come up behind me and scare me every time, and he keeps on laughing when I try to get back at him. He's the worst. Annette bemoaned. Edelgard stared blankly at her. If she squinted hard enough, their situation mirrored Hubert and Ferdinand's eerily closely. Annette gave off a cute chuckle and kicked her feet. I guess I shouldn't be worried about something like that right now. We've got bigger problems, all the time. Lady Rhea is still missing, Thales is still at large, and now the kingdom is in uproar at the idea of you becoming queen. You've got it tough, Edelgard. I know I wouldn't want to be in your shoes. I certainly don't want to be in them either, she agreed quietly, leaning back on the bed and staring at the ceiling. It's hard to remember that he was your brother, at times. Did you know? You know, before you, she trailed off, but Edelgard could easily fill in the gaps. No. I had no idea. He never deigned to tell me, and I couldn't remember because of some extraneous circumstances, so I didn't know until the very end. Annette sighed. Yeah, that sounds just like him. Dimitri would always keep his problems bottled up inside. He always tried to take on everything he could alone, you know? He fought like that and he lived like that, He acted like it wasn't something that could be done if he couldn't do it alone. It didn't help that he was right half the time. That strength of his was out of this world. Can you tell me more about him? How desperately she yearned to know about the brother she had only just recently lost. Poking the wound made it hurt more, but it had settled somewhat, turning from a nerve-deep burn into a scald, constantly sizzling but not something that would render her useless. Sure, but most of the things that I can tell you aren't happy, Annette warned, and Edelgard just nodded her assent. Cautiously, Annette continued. Well, Dimitri wasn't the type of guy who wouldn't smile often. He would usually be staring off into the distance with some sullen look on his face, and if he smiled, it was usually only whenever he got into a really good memory, but even then, it barely lasted. During their first battle, in Arianrod, Dimitri had been smiling. Smiling widely, fervently, as though all the happiness in the world had been afforded to him at that moment. She thought he was laughing at her. Looking back at it now, he was likely just happy to see her again, regardless of the circumstances. And he talked like my father a lot, too, always saying things like, "I can't be forgiven," or other stuff along those lines. He always talked about himself like he was some unrepentant monster. I don't think he ever realized just how much we all loved him. I mean, it's hard to put that into words, but, even Felix tried to show it, in his own weird way. Gah, it's hard to say stuff like this. Do you get the gist of it, at least? Edelgard nodded slowly. I do. And truly, she did. The Blue Lions had shown their love for Dimitri overwhelmingly so far. They were all one ship that had lost her captain, adrift at sea and exposed to the sun. They were crashing and burning as one, each of them coping in their own way, each of them fighting to stay sane. She felt that she understood them all just a little bit more after today. It wouldn't be enough, never enough to make up for what she'd taken from them. But she will always do her best to reach out to them. If nothing else, she owed it to Dimitri. The pair were silent for a long time. Annette was quiet as she thought. Ah, I know. I could tell you some stories. I've got a few good ones from Dash. No, I think I've heard enough for today. Thank you, Annette, genuinely. You can't understand how much this meant to me. Edelgard pulled herself to her feet. You're leaving already? Annette asked, and from her tone, she could almost say that the other girl was lonely. I can't stay here and hide forever. There are things that I must do, people I must face. Thank you for spending time with me, Annette. She opened the door, and on the other side stood Juritsa. Edelgard startled, angling her neck up to stare at the larger man. Juritsa? What are you? Dash? A fist connected with her jaw, and this time, she felt the bone break. Somehow, miraculously, all of her teeth still remained intact. Annette squeaked as Edelgard tumbled, and immediately crouched in front of her, raising a tome and beginning to heal her. Why did you do that? Juritsa leered down on her from on high, and spoke with his usual drawl. She made Mercedes cry. Edelgard's forehead touched the cool flooring, and she let out a groan. She hated the kingdom. Check the description for the links to the author.